allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And with that, we are on to item number 2, which is changes to the order of the agenda. Does anyone from the public, staff, or council have a request for a change to the order of the agenda? I've received none so far tonight. Council? Public? All right, and the agenda stands. And then item number 3, report from closed session from City Attorney Lanzone.
There is nothing to report at this time, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you very much. And with that, we'll move on to council communications and announcements, item number 4. Straight down here, Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Yes, I have this 3 short announcements here, all coming up this next week. On Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock at Hiller, there's a community workshop on the general plan. The general plan, of course, is kind of our roadmap of what goes where. It's commercial, mixed-use, residential, what gets built downtown on the east side and so forth. There's been a lot of work on some other presentations, so this is another opportunity for the public to come. Again, Hiller at 7 o'clock. And then we kind of crank up the noise a little bit on Friday night, the long-awaited concert series. We're running about a month late due to the construction and so forth of the playground, but this is our 18th year of our summer concert series. The success is that you don't need to know who plays. It just come at 6 o'clock till 8, Burden Park, and music will be there. Although I will tell you that the California Cowboys are playing at the first one. So please come to that. And then Saturday, just another kind of an activity with our San Carlos Fine Arts Association. We'll have art in the park, our downtown park, downtown there right across from B of A, near Spazos and all that area of town. They will be there with an art show from 9 until 4 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
All right, good. With that, we will move on to item number 5A, which is a presentation of a plaque to Planning Commissioner Lee Thompson for his years of service on the Planning Commission. So, Commissioner Thompson, let me meet you down at the podium.
You said you could leave.
Well, it's with a pleasure but sadness that we present this to you, Lee. For those of you that don't know, I'm guessing most people do know that Lee's been involved in the city for many, many years, from Park and Rec Commission, City Council, Planning Commission, and the community is built on the pillars, the foundation of people like Lee Thompson. Selfless, great mind, and has put it to use in town here for selfless benefit of the community. So, Lee, I want to thank you very much, present you with this small token of our appreciation for all your years of hard work, and thank you very much on behalf of the council and the city. And
I get to say a few words. Thank you all, city council, staff. Just a couple of things. One of the wonderful things about San Carlos is most cities you find 10% of the people doing 80% of the work. I think in San Carlos we have a much larger base. We have about 25% of the people doing, so it's shared much more in this city, and that's one of the wonderful things. And the other thing is what got me started doing stuff is my wife always used to say, they ought to do this, they ought to do that. Well, we were all the they. That's the important thing to remember, and that's sort of what the motto I use as I did things for the city and the committees and et cetera. So again, thank you for the opportunity, and I hope I won't disappear, appear on this side of the podium and make comments. And I want to thank Mr. Lanzone for not rubbing anything in on me tonight, as he's done in the past. Thank you.
And with that, we'll move on to item number 5B, which is a presentation of a proclamation to Daniel Welsh of Troop 321 upon receiving his Eagle Scout Award. Well, Daniel, I'll just embarrass you for a quick second here and read a little bit from the proclamation. Whereas the Boy Scouts of America is a character-building organization composed of young men who are seeking to prepare themselves as better leaders, citizens for tomorrow, by developing those traits and strengths of character of all people. Scouting plays a vital force in the lives of many hundreds of boys in the city of San Carlos who are guided by a great many adult volunteers who have given generously of their time and talents, whereas a special and unique honor of achieving the highest award in scouting has been earned by Daniel Welsh of Troop 321. And now I'm going to fall in the fine line of Mayor Davids, who always liked to embarrass the Scout by saying, can you tell us a little bit about your Eagle Scout project? Please.
Well, I did some landscaping work down at the Church of the Epiphany on the corner of Arroyo and Cedar. They had this area out front that was pretty much just bare dirt and not very attractive, so I dug it up, installed a new sprinkler system, and planted a bunch of flowers and small plants and stuff, so it looks a lot better now. So if you want to swing by there and see sometime, it's really quite beautiful.
And based on that resume, Daniel will be at my house Saturday, so anybody like to come by and see his handiwork. Congratulations, Daniel, on the fine award. All right. That brings us to item number 6, which is public comment. This portion of public comment is for persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda this evening, and you may do so at this time for a limit of 2 people per item. So I have just 2 speaker items for item number 10. I have one that says item 10 or sooner. Item 10. Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody that's wished to address the council now on items not on tonight's agenda?
Also 10.
It's 10. Okay, with that, seeing no public comment, we'll move on to item number 7. Item 7 is the approval of the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless they're removed by members of the council, staff, or public for separate action. So with that, item number 7. Any requests from the public to remove any items or council?
Mr. Mayor, I move for the approval of consent calendar items 7A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, and N.
Thank you for that detail. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Christine?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Lewis?
Yes. And that on to item number 8, which is reports to council. It doesn't look like we have any reports to council. Is that true?
We have no additional reports.
Very good. So move on to item number 9. Just want everybody to note that Vice Mayor Grisilli was way behind me at the last meeting. I'm actually getting much faster than he was capable of the last meeting. Just a joke for the public record.
Are you calling me a joke, Mr. Mayor?
Read it. Yeah, item number 9A, public hearing, consideration of abandoning a 5-foot wide strip along the easterly side of the 1400 block of Oakhurst Avenue between Belmont Avenue and White Oak Way.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, again, this 5-foot strip of public right-of-way that is not being used by the city. There are no plans to use it in the future, and the homeowner has requested abandonment of this right-of-way to give him more room for the addition to their homes. And, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Questions? Motions?
Motion to close the public hearing?
I'm sorry.
I don't know if we asked if anybody wanted to speak at it first.
All right, let's do that first. So if there's no questions from council, public hearing, is anybody wishing to speak on this item?
Move to close public hearing.
Sorry.
And I think we have a second on that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Discussion, council? Or motions?
I'll make a motion to approve item 9A.
Second.
Thank you. Christine?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Lewis?
Yes. I'm to item number 9B, consideration of adopting a resolution approving National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, charges for fiscal year 2008 and 9.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the fees for the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, has not changed. The reason this is in front of you is to place the fees on the property tax bill. A city council resolution is required. So that's why the item is in front of the city council, to adopt the resolution so we can place the charges on the property tax bill.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Markari on this? With that, this is a public hearing. Is any members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Move to close public hearing.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Discussion or motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move for adoption of resolution number 2008-
44?
resolution of the City Council, City of San Carlos Natural Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Program fees for fiscal year 2008-2009.
Second.
Christine?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Lewis?
Yes. And with that, we are on to item number 10A, and this is unfinished business. Consideration of adopting a resolution calling for a special municipal election and requesting the Board of Supervisors of the County of San Mateo consolidate the election to be held on Tuesday, November 4, 2008, with any consolidated elections to be held on the date pursuant to 10403 of the Elections Code. And we have a staff presentation prior to public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This item is back at the request of the City Council from the last meeting. The city's structural deficit has been well documented here in the city of San Carlos for the last number of years. We've had 8 years of successive cuts, many of them predating my tenure with the city, starting 3 years ago. Those annual cuts have been by way of an attempt to address an ongoing structural problem that the city has in terms of rising expenditures proceeding at a rate faster than our revenue stream is increasing. The city has attempted to increase revenue in the past through various means. We've established an economic development program, and we're in the process tonight. You've got a couple of items on the agenda: an economic development plan and the 5-year implementation plan. And those are efforts that, over the long haul, we hope will help address by stimulating economic activity. That will help address part of the issue here in terms of a structural problem from a revenue and expenditure standpoint. In addition to that, though, we've made attempts in past years to adopt revenue measures, the most recent being the 2006 fire parcel tax. That was a measure that was brought forward to the voters in San Carlos. It was structured in such a manner as being a 50+1% parcel tax to generate funds that would pay for enhancements to, actually maintaining the Belmont San Carlos Fire Department and some enhancements to the formula therein. That measure, as you know, was promoted by council members Grocott and Grisilli as members of the fire board, presented to their voters within the city of San Carlos. It failed, however, and did not generate the revenue that was hoped from that measure. And we've still, though, provided fire services as well as the other services that traditionally have been sought from the city of San Carlos. We've reestablished the Belmont San Carlos Fire Department. We established the new formula therein. But the continued increases in the expenditures that the city has faced over the last number of years, the failure of the revenue stream to keep up with those expenditures, have continued to put additional pressures on the city organization. And in February of this year, I presented a report to the City Council that talked about having reached a point that I referenced at the time as being the tipping point. And a critical juncture, if you will, in terms of where we have reached, wherein we can no longer simply realize a balanced budget through increased efficiencies, reorganizations, and the other means, accounting adjustments, if you will, that we've used in the past to try and address the problem. That as we now make reductions moving into the future, you're going to see noticeable, and the community is going to see noticeable impacts to the services that are being provided within this community. And I think in many ways, and we'll talk about some of those impacts here in just a minute, but you've realized some of those with the closing of facilities, with the loss of positions and programs, not just positions that have been funded in the budget, but rather programs that those people were charged with providing. Certainly, the situation today is more dire than it was 2 years ago when the parcel tax was presented to the people of San Carlos. The city in the last year has attempted to address the $2.7 million shortfall by making over 30 program cuts, elimination of 6 full-time positions, reduction and layoff of part-time employees in the Parks and Recreation and Administration departments, terminating certain adult sports programming, dropping full-time staff support for the Caring Cupboard Senior Food Program, closing the Kiwanis building, returning Heather Field to schools for maintenance, and of course transferring the $1.2 million from the infrastructure fund to the traditional general fund for paying for operational services. And that's the $1.2 million that historically, in good times, the city has used for putting into its capital fund for repairs of roads and storm drains and other capital infrastructure. It's money that you've used for seed purposes in building a library or in building the youth center. We're no longer using those funds to replenish the infrastructure fund. We're now using those money for your ongoing operational expenses in order to balance the budget. Over the past several years, we've made additional and more severe cuts. We've reduced the staffing levels from 126 to 113 in the city of San Carlos. Administrative services has been reduced by 30%, Public Works by 19%, Parks and Recreation by 18.5%, and Police by 7%. That includes 7 full-time positions within the Police Department, 5 sworn personnel. And in addition to that, we've outsourced the dispatch operations within the Police Department. The employees have been asked to contribute to the problems historically here by foregoing cost of living increases for a period of years. In addition to that, both the Police Department and the Belmont San Carlos Fire Department have had the benefits package reduced for new employees moving into those departments. As you all know, and perhaps most of the people in the community now know, most of the public safety employees in San Mateo County have a 3 at 50 retirement program. That package has been changed for our public personnel or our public safety personnel to a 3 at 55. It, over the long haul, will produce savings for the city of San Carlos. In the short term, perhaps not so much. But even with all of those adjustments and changes and those contributions to attempt the problem or to address the problem from a reduction in programs and services and employee salaries and benefits, it isn't enough to solve the problem. And we've shown you moving forward that, and what's circled in red there is a continued expectation that given trends that we will have continued deficits moving forward and additional cuts to the tune of $800, $1.3 million, and $1.4 million in the upcoming 3 years will be necessary in order to maintain a balanced budget moving forward. It would be one thing to say that you aren't going to notice the impacts of that if you were starting from a very healthy situation, if you had more employees than other neighborhoods, if you were paying your employees more than you were paying or your neighboring cities were paying. The difficulty here is that's not the case. The city of San Carlos has 113 employees, and as you can see, the other cities generally our size in the neighborhood have many more employees than what the city of San Carlos does. We've talked before about the fact that the property tax distribution in San Carlos is not what your neighboring communities have. We get 13% of the property tax dollar back in San Carlos. If you look at your neighboring cities, Foster City, Redwood City, Belmont, Colma, those cities get nearly twice as much of the property tax dollar back as the city of San Carlos does. And that's something that is fixed in law. It's not something we can change here locally. But yet we're expected to provide the same level of services as the cities of Belmont, Redwood City, Foster City does in terms of recreation programming, in terms of police staffing, in terms of compensation for police and fire personnel and the like. In addition, we've shown the City Council previously that even though most of your neighboring cities get a greater share of the property tax dollar, that because of the economic conditions and the desire to maintain service levels in our neighboring communities, that most communities in the San Mateo County area have adopted special taxes in any event. So not only are they getting a higher share of the property tax dollar, but they've enacted special taxes, either a UUT, which is those cities that are shown in the red, or some other kind of a special tax for police and fire, landscape and lighting districts, and that's shown in the blue and red cross-hatched areas. And then there are some cities that have not enacted special taxes, but those tend to be the cities in green that have special revenue sources from their economic development activities. They have auto malls, they have shopping malls, they have a complex of hotels such as Half Moon Bay or Burlingame. Assets that the city of San Carlos does not share or have in the same proportion or nature or magnitude. We've talked about those slides. We've talked about the general state of the city's budget in the community for a number of years, starting with the presentation in February before the City Council, though it's become apparent to city staff that economic development activity is not going to be sufficient to address this problem in the short term. It's something that is 5 to 10 years out if we're aggressive, I think, in order to really address the problem in a meaningful way. We've felt the need to explain to the community the predicament that the city of San Carlos is in, how your neighboring communities have addressed those issues by putting taxes before their voters for consideration and actually passing those taxes to provide the levels of services that are being provided in your neighboring communities. Making the presentation to the City Council, staff proceeded to start meeting with members of the community. We started with the EDAC Commission. We've met with the Economic Development Partnership. We've met a couple of times with the Chamber of Commerce in different formats. We've met with various retailers within the community through meetings that the Chamber of Commerce has arranged for us. And what I can say is I was genuinely surprised, I think, by the reaction. After talking with the community, after talking with the commissions and the committees and the residents in this community, with the thought, actually, and just being very direct and honest, thinking that we probably would be looking at some kind of a special measure or a general measure in 2009 or 2010, but thinking we needed to start now to explain to the community what the situation was in terms of the health of our city and the kinds of cuts and reductions that we were looking at for the next year or two until those opportunities might present themselves in future years. The feedback that we got was very strong, saying, don't wait. Give us an opportunity now before you destroy the programs, before you lose the departments, before you shut down the facilities in this community. Before it gets to that point, give us an opportunity to actually consider having a special measure here in San Carlos similar to what all of your neighbors have. And because of that interest, we reported that back to the City Council, and we're hearing from commissions and committees and individuals. But the thought was that, well, perhaps what we ought to do is actually do a poll in the community and actually see what the citizens in San Carlos felt about this measure. And we did that with the help of Tramatola and a polling firm working with them to survey residents within the city of San Carlos, and are pleased to report that we had a 90% satisfaction report from the residents here. But more importantly, what we found is that nearly two-thirds, 66%, actually supported the passage of a sales tax to maintain the level of services that are currently being provided within the city of San Carlos. And it's from the staff standpoint at that point, and we know what the trends are. We know what the essentials and necessities will be here in this city if we're going to address these problems in terms of making future cuts. We know the severity of the situation. We've been reporting on it for 8 years in one form or another, more aggressively in the last year or two. But working with the committee that worked with the Tramutola and the polling firm, brought forward a recommendation to the City Council at the last meeting that we actually place an opportunity on the next ballot for the community to consider a half-cent sales tax with a 10-year sunset, and bringing the documents and paperwork forward for the City Council to consider this evening to that end. The means by which to do this for this November requires that this city makes finding of a fiscal emergency in this community. And that is the basis by which you can have a measure on this coming November's election with a majority rule mandate from the community in terms of making the decision as to whether or not a sales tax would be implemented or not. We've included within the staff report the findings that we believe would be appropriate for the City Council in making the declaration as required. One is to note that the city has been spending more of the general fund money than the incoming revenue, and so we've been drawing down upon the reserves. As that works out here, we've been drawing down upon the reserves in the infrastructure funds that because of that $1.2 million transfer into the general fund that we talked about previously. Over the last 8 years in a row, the city has taken steps to increase revenue and to make cuts. As we talked about, the city has made 30% cuts in administration, 19% from public works, 18% from parks and recreation, 7% from police, including those 7 positions I mentioned earlier. We've cut adult sports programs, recreation facilities and programs. Currently today, and this is a situation found similar to, and I hesitate to mention it, but the city of Vallejo, as you all know, has filed for bankruptcy. And they went through much what we're going through now, where they cut all of their other programs to where they pretty much had police and fire that were 75% of their budget. And at that point, ended up saying we can't afford to, we've cut all of our library programs, our recreation programs, our social service programs. We have police and fire left, and then they couldn't make those adjustments to meet those expenses either, and it ended up declaring bankruptcy. Well, our general fund now has 75% for police, fire, and parks and recreation, the 3 top priorities in terms of services that the poll identified for the city of San Carlos, and that's grown from 60% in the last few years. We're doing the same kind of thing. We're cutting the non-essential programs. We've cut administration to the bone, and you've cut you're cutting your recreation and your social programming to be able to pay for the public safety and core essential services for a city. The use of the $1.2 million, which I mentioned earlier, we've been unable to fully cover and pay for the expenses that the actuarial studies have shown are necessary to fully fund your GASB 45 or your retiree medical obligations. And by not doing that, we're simply pushing that burden off in a much more extraordinary way for future generations and future councils to have to address. We should be funding those obligations now. The fire department is. They have fully recognized that that is an obligation that needs to be fully funded now. We've got the multi-year study showing the growing and continuing deficit. We know that there will be state and federal mandates. There have been public hearings, for example, on drainage requirements and the programs that we're going to need to implement in our creeks and storm drains, which will require additional personnel and as well as capital expenditures. Those will be general fund expenditures. You will not be reimbursed for those expenditures from the city or from the state because they won't be state mandates. They'll be federal mandates. The city has inadequate reserves that we've talked about previously because, or for an emergency. The state is considering, and just this last week, the state has talked about declaring its own state of an emergency and possibly taking an additional 8% of the property tax money from the city of San Carlos and other cities. That reduction is not funded in your current general fund budget. If there's anything new between the last meeting that might be further cause for concern, alarm, and if anyone was teetering about the prospect of actually declaring an emergency, the loss of another $500,000 plus from your budget because of state takings, which were discussed very openly by the state last week, is something that should be contemplated and prepared for. And finally, we know that we're going to be facing additional program cuts, real program cuts, in the next year if we do not act and give the community an opportunity this year to address these budgetary problems. We've surveyed other cities in the time that we've had allotted to determine, we mentioned at the last meeting that there's not a legal threshold for what really is necessary to make the findings of an emergency. Basically, it takes a unanimous vote of this city council to make those findings. And that, if you make those findings, we're not aware of any city that, or any challenge to those findings being made by the local political body. We have, Mr. Mora has, the assistant city manager has done a survey, though, and found 6 other cities that have declared and made certain findings. None of them are as extensive as the 12 points that we brought before you this evening for consideration. Most were contemplating the prospect of future cuts if action weren't taken more quickly in their communities, and all of those cities ended up having measures passed with a less than 2/3 majority, but with a majority sufficient to address the problems in those communities. There were several issues talked about at the last meeting, and I don't plan on getting into this in a whole lot of detail unless there are additional questions, but in the report we addressed the inquiries from the City Council last time, talking to the prospect of perhaps saving money by cutting additional positions out of the planning department. Actually, when I wrote the report, I thought we were talking about just the level of pay of those 2 positions, and going back and watching the tape, it seems as though the issue might have actually been suggesting that we cut those positions. That would be severely impacting the effect and ability of your planning department. We didn't propose that. It was one of the reductions that were listed during the budget considerations, but far down the list, because we have an obligation to do environmental review of project applications. We have a number of remodels. We have a general plan that's being rewritten. Every time a project or an application comes along, we have an obligation to review that application and ensure that neighborhoods are being protected, that the environment is being protected, and that we're processing in a timely way the applicants that we have before us. The second issue that was raised was a cost of living increase or adjustment that was made with the contractor in the Public Works and Engineering Department. The value of that cost of living increase is $2,640 or something of that nature. The situation that we had is we had planned for a succession plan, a transition plan. The person that was to serve in that capacity left the city and went to a different job. We immediately started the recruitment to fill the position being vacated by this contract, but that person wasn't hired yet and isn't coming on board now until September. I'm happy to say that we've actually filled the position subsequently. But we've given a minor cost of living increase to the contract that is providing the public works and city engineering expenses for the city. We think it's well worth that $2,644 in order to have somebody on board to assist in the transition, because that firm or the person actually has provided decades of service to this community, and to actually have that person here during the transition we think is of critical importance. And I could simply point you to another contract you approved just minutes ago in the consent calendar worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that person is supervising and moving along in the sanitary sewer rehabilitation arena. Hundreds of thousands of dollars that this additional $2,600 helps ensure not only that those projects keep moving, but that there is a smooth transition between this contract and the next person that comes on board. The assistant city manager, the suggestion was that that's another position that we haven't discussed. This is actually going to be the 4th time that we've talked about that position at a public meeting just in the last few months. And I've outlined in the report, it's not a position that we're talking about here in just a position. That position is assigned numerous responsibilities that other cities actually have people assigned to or divisions created to accommodate. We have one person who is charged with being the city zoning administrator. He's our representative to the SAMCAT board, which manages our cable access franchise. The SVWMA, the Waste Management Authority board. We can eliminate the position, but we're still charged with picking up the garbage in the community, or having a franchise contract pick up the garbage in this community. We're still charged with having a recycling program. We still have pressure to have green programs created and administered in this community. So the zoning administrator, the SAMCAT board representative, the SVWMA board representative, the recycling coordinator, the greens program coordinator, and the public information officer are all duties and responsibilities assigned to that one position. And those duties and responsibilities and legal mandates and charges, if we don't comply with the recycling mandates, there will be mandates placed upon you that you will have to comply with. So we're working diligently in order to comply with those mandates without having them forced upon you or having fines placed upon you for noncompliance. All of that is being handled by one position. The budget process and options, again, we know that even if a measure passes, we'll go through an annual budget process in any event, and we're going to be as frugal as we can be in addressing the services and demands upon the city moving forward. There has been some discussion about doing a true zero-based budget, and we'll do that if the council chooses to go in that direction. We actually have historically done a modified zero-based budgeting approach. We've asked the departments to consider 15% reductions each and every year. And because of that process, we've been able to make that 30% reduction in administration or 19% in public works and 18% in parks and recreation. We think that actually 15% is a pretty healthy, especially given all of the reductions we've made historically. We really do believe that that's a pretty significant analysis of the services that we do provide above and beyond what are just essential and very core to city services. But what we've begun discussions at the staff level, and we'll certainly be talking more with the City Council about this moving forward, is actually increasing that threshold from a 15% to a 25% and asking for reductions of that magnitude. At that point, you're talking about possibly saving up to between $4.2 and $5.6 million in reductions, but those reductions are going to come at an enormous expense to this community in terms of programs and facilities. You will see wholesale alterations in the way that you provide police and fire services. You will see facilities closed. You will see parks closed. I mean, you will see at that level wholesale changes in the very nature of city services that are being provided in this community. We believe that the fiscal emergency in this community is real. We have cut police positions. We are at a point that further reductions in that department will change the basic public safety coverage that you have in this community in terms of the staffing schedules, and we'll talk about that in more detail here in the upcoming months as we talk both about fire and police schedules moving forward. We know that you're closing facilities in the Parks and Recreation world already. There will be additional closures moving forward if we do not make adjustments in terms of how we raise revenue in this community. And those are decisions that we know and we're prepared to make. I mean, that's what we do. And we will balance the budget every year so that we don't end up in a situation similar to some other cities, whether that be Desert Hot Springs or the city of Vallejo up in Northern California. We believe that we have a fiduciary responsibility to promptly address the problems. You don't have to hit the iceberg before you declare that there's a problem and take some steps in order to avert that problem. And so we know that the community, through its commissions, through its committees, through the public opinion survey, have asked us to give them an opportunity to consider solutions to this situation short of continuations of the reductions and the cuts that we've been making to date. And so with that, we're pleased to present to you the documents this evening that would give you the opportunity to adopt the resolution and approve the ordinance that places the proposed half-cent sales tax revenue measure on the November 2008 ballot for citizen consideration. That concludes my report. I would be happy to address any questions that the City Council might have at this juncture.
So I'd like to address any questions on the report for the city manager. If council can do that now before we take public comment and before we have discussion. Council? Questions?
I have a few.
Sorry?
I said I have a few. No one else does.
That's yours.
Okay. First question is just a curiosity. You had Hillsborough and Atherton on your report as cities that have other types of taxes or revenue measures whereby they gain income other than property tax and sales tax. I was curious, Hillsborough, does Hillsborough even have a sales tax? They are just a bedroom community.
I mean, in terms of the special taxes, I believe they have public safety taxes, but
Public safety tax.
But in terms of sales tax, they don't have a business district of any kind, so they don't have sales tax.
They have a they would get a share of the sales tax activity in their community.
I don't think they have any activity in their community.
I mean, they may not have much, but similar to the city of San Carlos doesn't have much by comparison to the city of San Mateo or the city of Redwood City. We certainly don't have the hotels that Burlingame has or the hotels that Half Moon Bay
Sure,
has. Certainly, there are other cities that have less sales activity than the city of San Carlos, no question.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that's true of Hillsborough, and Atherton might have some, but not very much. On page 3 of your staff report, you mentioned the Gatsby 45 under item 7 on page 3. And if we're to do what's suggested there, which is fund these obligations, how much are we talking about annually?
Annually, it's about $900,000. We currently, I think, are in the neighborhood of $600,000 or $650,000 that we are paying towards that obligation.
So right now, we're paying about $650,000 annually.
And
We'd have to up that.
Off the top of my head, I think that's a pretty good guesstimate, yes. So we're short $250,000 to $350,000 from what our annual obligation should be in order to address that problem moving forward.
Okay. On page 7 of your report, actually it's at the bottom of page 6 and then runs up to the top of page 7. It's a little confused because you talked about, you start off saying the city manager has initiated conversation with key department personnel, parks and rec, administration, and police. And then later you say the value of a 25% package from those 3 areas. Is that the same 3 areas you're talking about? Those 3? Or when you talk about a 25%?
Administration, Parks and Recreation, and Police. But then I also, in the report, show you if you add fire into the equation, which I believe you need to do.
But when you talk about the 3, you're talking about Parks and Rec, Administration, and Police?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear on that when I was looking at things. The next question I have is the way the recommendation is set up and the way the action item is set up. You're asking us to put a measure on the ballot, but you're coupling that at the same time with declaring a fiscal emergency.
Yes.
However, we could put a measure on the ballot without declaring a fiscal emergency and then have a 2/3 vote threshold. Is that correct?
Yes. In order to do that, I mean, this evening, we would have to come back at a special meeting and prepare the documents for that alternative.
Right.
But yes.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I just wanted to be clear.
Mark, can I add to that?
Sure.
The Constitution only allows a general tax in 2 instances. One, at the general municipal election, or if you declare a fiscal emergency. It's the only time you can put on a general tax that will go in the general fund. Otherwise, it has to be a specific tax. The measure you have before you tonight is for money to go into the general fund to be used generally for the purposes stated by the city manager. So if you wanted to change this and try for a 2/3 vote, then you would have to pick out the things that you want the special tax to go for. And those haven't been identified or addressed by staff in this resolution. So we can't just cross out, for example, emergency, and just pass it. We'd have to redo the whole thing.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then the last question, actually I have two more questions. One's pretty detailed, but one's just kind of general. You talked about a fiduciary responsibility on also page 7. And it talks about having a fiduciary responsibility to promptly address the problem. In your opinion, as city manager, one of the things we see when we've looked at some figures a while back where we looked at revenues increasing from year to year about 3% or so, but expenses in operations matching our revenue increases, but expenditures in terms of employee cost going up 7%. So as a city manager, do you feel like we have a fiduciary responsibility as a council to try and bring those two in line? In other words, to bring our expenses in line with what we have
Yes.
as
Yes, I
as
mean, we balance the
revenue.
budget every year. And we will continue to balance the budget every year as, per at least the staff recommendation moving forward. So the choice is either we raise more revenue or we cut programs and facilities and, and services. So, I mean, the answer is yes. We do believe, and we have presented every year this council with a balanced budget. And what it's meant is every year we provide more severe and significant programs reductions and cuts.
Okay, but that's...
The fire department budget, for example, went up 9% this year. The only way to pay for that, if your revenue is going up 3%, is to take that revenue that was currently allocated to other departments and services and move it to the fire department.
Okay, that's answering the question, but it's answering differently than I asked it, but that's okay. I'll take your answer. Then the question I have that's rather detailed is, because we have the item in our packet, item 11C, which is economic development, I noticed when I was reading through that the report written by RSG has far different forecasts for these outlying years than what item 10A has. And if you'll bear with me, I was taking what this report has from RSG regarding property tax, sales tax, and transit occupancy tax, the three that it identified, and the difference in fiscal year 09, fiscal year 010, and fiscal year 011, each year is about, the first year it's a $3 million difference, just in the, if you coagulate those three revenues. The second year, it's 3.2 million, and then in the 011 year, it's 3.35 different. And then when you take the general fund total, or the general fund total, in 09, the difference is about 800,000. In 010, it's about 1.3 million, and in the last year, it's 1.7 million. In other words, there's 1.7 million more in revenue being shown in RSG's report than what's being shown in item 10A's forecast.
And the latter report is the updated report. I mean, the numbers are constantly being altered and updated pursuant to new data that we're getting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And RSG prepared both reports for us. I mean, so it's the latter report is simply updated.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions for staff at this time? Next, we'll take public comment. I have 3 speaker slips. If anybody else would like to speak, there's speaker slips, I think, on the table back there. You're also welcome to come and state your name and city of residence and fill out a slip after we're done, after you're done speaking, if you'd prefer. So at this time, Jerry Fujimoto.
Good evening, Mayor Lewis and City Council members. I'm Jerry Fujimoto. I'm the Youth Development Supervisor for the City of San Carlos, and I'm in the mid-management unit here in the city, and I have been in public service for 30 years for this community. During that 30 years I've been in the mid-management unit, I've seen ups and downs of the economy and of city management, city councils, and city financial situations. 30 years is a long time. I started when I was 5. I've seen and participated in the increasing of programs, the efficiency of our city, and the facilities, additional facilities throughout the years in this city. With the increase of services, facilities, and programs comes additional work for the employees. Due to cutbacks in the budget and a freeze on hiring existing positions, present mid-management employees have to do double the amount of work and not be compensated for it. Facilities are being closed, and it's creating an adverse impact on our citizens. Most importantly, our young citizens will suffer in the long run. San Carlos has the reputation of being a community of service. The face of the city are those employees out in the field working every day the friendly voice when you call City Hall, the full and part-time recreation staff, our parks, police, fire, building and public works employees, and the mid-management employees who are face-to-face with our citizens, young and old, every day. In the Recreation Department alone, people trust us with their children's welfare and growth, their parents who are frail and elderly, and for the health and wellness needs of our whole community. We are asking that the City Council consider alternatives for additional city revenue. Not all avenues have been exhausted, such as the half-cent sales tax. The shortfall cannot continue to fall on the backs of the employees who have already given every day as a public servant. San Carlos employees urge the City Council to approve the half-cent tax initiative for the November 08 ballot so that the citizens of San Carlos can decide, not just 5 people in this community, on whether or not to institute the additional revenue, and so that we can start to recover from the past years of budget cuts, potential medical and retirement cuts to the city employees, and mid-management employee hiring freezes. We cannot wait another year, nor weather additional cuts before this recovery should begin.
Thank you very much. And our next public speaker is Ron Collins.
Members of the council, my name is Ron Collins and I live in San Carlos. I am here tonight in 2 capacities. First, as a member of the board of directors of the chamber, I wish to convey to you the board's position regarding the city's proposed declaration of a fiscal emergency. And second, as a 41-year resident, I want to offer a personal perspective. Recently, the chamber held 2 focus groups of Eastside and downtown retail business owners. All but one agreed that a half-cent sales tax would not have any significant effect on their business. Then, last Thursday, the board voted unanimously to support the city in this declaration. After much discussion, we all agree that it is not wise for the city to go in the direction of Vallejo. Our chamber works with several local entities to improve economic development in San Carlos, and we are publishing a brochure that will be mailed to all residents in the next few weeks, encouraging them to shop San Carlos, which adds to the sales tax of the city. If San Carlos continues down this deteriorating path of financial distress without a remedy, there will be serious consequences for our members. You cannot separate the city's financial health from that of its businesses. Making this declaration puts the decision of a sales tax increase in the hands of the voters, not the council. Now, as a resident, I want to say that your failure to act as a unanimous body tonight will have far-reaching effects on our town. After so many recent cuts, any more will impact the absolute quality of life in a very public and visual way. Our police department is already depleted. And further cuts will dangerously compromise public safety and the ability of our police department to attract positions for quality officers. And if you think there is much to be saved in cutting certain staff positions, I suggest that you spend one day with those whose jobs you would eliminate and find out what they do to keep this city fiscally sound. What it really comes down to is this. Do you trust the residents of San Carlos to make this decision? It is our right to decide whether or not to raise sales taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt Michaels, I believe it is.
Good evening, members of the council. My name is Matt Michaels. I'm a 51-year resident of San Carlos. Thank you very much for the time. I am against this tax, categorically and emphatically. I think, I don't know where the 600 people were, but the people I know in my neighborhoods are already burdened with significant property taxes and other living expenses, the fuel costs, all the other financial nightmares that are impinging on our citizenry today. And I don't think it's fair to throw another half-cent tax on it because we can't manage our budget. We should be balancing this budget and doing it responsibly and should have been doing it all along. I really believe that somewhere along the line we have to look under the rug and realize where the big issues are here. There are issues around retirement. There are issues around our financial structure for city employees. We need to have a wholesale house cleaning of what that really looks like. I see the police department running around in brand new cars with brand new equipment, brand new radios, and I see fire departments that are very well equipped, and I know they're doing extremely well. They're doing a great job for us, and we really appreciate it. But there's a point at which we have to be fiscally responsible about this stuff. It's got to start now. Again, as a 51-year resident, I've seen a lot of changes in the town. I think that we have probably extended ourselves a little beyond our fiscal means, and now is the time to tighten the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon McElvey? McElvey, sorry.
Mayor Lewis, Vice Mayor Grisilli, and council members. I'm Sharon McAlevey, business agent for AFSCME, which represents the clerical, technical, and mid-management units here in San Carlos. I come before you this evening to ask that you declare a fiscal emergency and place the sales tax issue on the ballot this November. As you know, we are currently in bargaining with the city, and the proposals we have received represent several steps backwards in the benefits we have worked so hard to achieve over the years. It is unfathomable for us to see you not declare a fiscal emergency, yet have us believe we should take seriously the cut in benefits being proposed. We have seen cuts in programs and buildings closing. Over the last several years, while other cities have increased staff, San Carlos has seen a reduction from 126 city employees to 113. This has been a cut in line staff directly responsible for public service, and as those services continue to be needed, the remaining staff's workload has increased. But they have absorbed that as their part of supporting the city during a very tough period. With any further cuts to staffing, there will be no alternative to a reduction in services. All we ask is you let the voters decide if they want to increase the sales tax by 0.5%. Survey results show that residents of San Carlos are currently highly satisfied with city services and the workers who do that work. With proper information, we believe they will vote to increase the tax. In this democracy we are so proud of, it would be an injustice not to vote to place this on the ballot this November. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Neil Zuckerman.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. My name is Neil Zuckerman. I am a business representative for Teamsters Local 856. The Parks and Public Works Division are my members. We are currently, as Sharon is, in negotiations with the city. I am speaking on behalf of our members and the Teamsters Union. We are in favor of the sales tax being put on the initiative in November of 2008. We encourage that. I've sat and listened to, written some things down here and kind of deviate from that a little bit. I've sat and listened to the mayor's presentation, and I've been a Teamster for 41 years. I've seen many, many employees, workers, jobs eliminated, benefits cut, and it was a very difficult time for everybody. You have a difficult task in front of you, but the alternative is not a very pretty one. We, as a group and a unit, encourage you to put that tax on the ballot in November of 2008. I think that the crisis demands it. With everything that I've seen so far this evening, I don't see any other alternative. I thank you for your time, and good evening.
Thank you. And my last speaker slip is for Jack, and I'm sorry, Jack, I think your last name starts with an H, but that's all I've got. And if anybody else would like to speak after Jack, please line up over by the door.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Jack Young.
I'm sorry, Jack. It really was tough. Close up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a 38-year resident here in San Carlos. Seen many changes. My big concern tonight is it seems to me that you're trying to circumvent your own rules here by declaring emergency and not allowing the two-thirds vote to tell you whether or not the city really wants a tax. I congratulate Matt Grocott for his decision at this time, and I know from the papers that he's not in favor of it. There are many things I'm sure the city is aware of. I don't have to tell you, and I'm sure if many of the city people knew that your financial situation probably goes far beyond your reduction in staff and all, your retirement funds and your retirement promises to those far before you are killing not just this city but many others. Your guarantees of 80 and 90% and 100% of salaries to retirees is, I'd sure like to see that for the rest of us. And I'm sure it's tough. They've been promises made, and it's very difficult to reduce those. Some of the difficulties of getting a 2/3 vote, I know are severe, but I still think it should be allowed. If you can't get a 2/3 vote, then perhaps the real citizens, not your surveys, but the real citizens of this city are not in favor of it. If you look at other cities, well, we all know about Vallejo. You look at others that have done what you're trying to do tonight, and that's your emergency declaration to get it passed. And I understand you need the money. I understand that. I would like to see, and it's very difficult, I'm sure, for the council members to treat the city budget as if it were your own. I'm self-employed. I have been all my life. And I'm sure it'd be nice and easy to spend somebody else's money. It's not, well, I shouldn't say easy. It's a difficult situation that you face, and I understand that. But once again, just if you put this on the ballot, let it be at a 2/3 vote. And if you have to make some changes, as the attorney has said you have to do, specifically where the money goes, so be it. Let us know where the money's going. And that's about all I have other than...
You're over the 2 minutes, so if you can conclude, that would be fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have some more public comment. Please go ahead and state your name. You can give that to the city clerk when you're done speaking.
Nick Pigueros, Walnut Street. I wanted to come before the council again this evening to implore you to reconsider any action that you may take tonight to impose a tax on the residents of San Carlos. There are a couple of key points here that some earlier speakers have brought up. This is not a once in a blue moon situation, which a fiscal emergency might suggest. This is a systemic problem. This is a problem with decisions that had been made, agreements that had been made in prior years by prior councils, and the only real solution is to take a look at those causes, take a look at those drivers that are resulting in a deficit. I know personally $50 of gas doesn't buy me what it bought me. It doesn't buy me as many miles as it bought me 2 years ago. I know that $50 in groceries doesn't buy me as much as it used to. And the same situation is the reality for the town's costs. I would like the City Council also to make it clear that that this half-cent sales tax travels with us. If I go to buy a car in the city of Burlingame, I would pay that half-cent sales tax on that car. I don't know that was necessarily, that's been discussed, but your sales tax is based on where you register your car. So I would implore the council to look at that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Please, Ms. Mitchell, and you give your form to the city clerk when you're finished.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council. I don't speak on behalf of any organization tonight, but I do know that a lot of people in San Carlos would agree with my comments. I felt it necessary because I have not heard this portion of the argument discussed, and I thought it was important that someone take it up, so Brian, please forgive me. I have heard recently at least one council member, and I believe only one council member, engage in the denigration of the position, if not the incumbent who fills the position of assistant city manager. San Carlos is not alone in having this position, but it is alone in having such a talented person. And I just made some notes in the back of the room. I only spoke with one person. I didn't speak with Brian, so I'm going to take up as much time as I'm allowed to within my time frame, and there are many more pages. I think it's important that we remember that not only Mr. Weiss showed examples of those things that position is responsible for, but I'm going to take you back a few years so that you can see how important this position is and how important this incumbent is. In addition to serving as finance director and being at times 90% responsible for preparation of the budget, at least 16 years that I know of a balanced budget during two very difficult times, he was acting public Park and Rec Director, acting Community Development Director, acting Economic Development Director, and de facto acting City Manager during a serious illness of our former City Manager. He was responsible for the first city-built website in the country, and while Palo Alto beat us online by one day, theirs was designed by a technology company and not by a member of a city staff. And when upgrading was necessary a few years later, they had to abandon their technology and adopt what Brian had done. His work in technology resulted in officials from China, England, Japan, Sweden, Thailand, France, and others visiting San Carlos to study Brian's work, and he received the National Award for Outstanding Public Technology. He lobbied successfully to prevent the overlay of new area codes, which would have required San Carlos homes and cell users to have 2 area codes and to dial 10 digits every time they called even their own home.
Sally, I'm going to ask you to
Okay.
conclude.
He's the only person in the history of the United States to receive 3 national awards for public technology and outstanding administrator. And I have more pages. I don't think you would seriously consider eliminating this position, but when you have such a talented incumbent, I ask you to seriously consider the thought at all.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right. With that, we'll close public comment. City Manager Weiss?
I just touched base with respect to the last question regarding the differences in the projections. A couple of things. One is I think if you look at the report, they still show the disparity between the general fund expenditures and general fund revenues. But secondarily, they also included some assumptions in the second report with respect to new economic development being successful in this community, new hotels, new economic development ventures that I can't necessarily pledge or tell you for sure that they're going to occur.
Thank you for that clarification. All right. Well, that one we'll have council discussion, keeping in mind that this is a necessity for unanimous council vote tonight. Councilmember Grocott, why don't you kick it off?
Well, certainly received a lot of emails from folks on this.
Yeah, I think we all have.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. Also went around and talked to a number of retailers, and what I've heard from most folks is pretty much equal to what was in the poll, which is a lot of people would at least entertain the idea of a sales tax. But from the people, at least that I've received emails from, or the retailers that I've talked to, putting it before the voters is not really the question. The question is to what threshold should the vote be subject to. And I heard someone tonight, I think it was Ron, talked about whether or not to put it in the hands of the voters. I heard someone talk about democracy as though, that's the important issue of letting the voters decide. And the question, do you trust the residents to make a decision? And I think in everybody's case that I talk to, folks do. Again, it just comes down to the question of, do we declare a fiscal emergency in order to change the vote threshold and the manner in which this is done. And I can say quite frankly that most of the folks that I've talked to or received emails from don't want to see that vote threshold lowered by declaring a fiscal emergency, nor do they necessarily see that we're in a fiscal emergency. I think if we are, and to whatever extent we are, that makes the argument all the more palatable, I think, to the voters, and should give confidence that a sales tax put before the voters could pass. And again, as the poll shows, there's either, if you combine likely to vote for or will vote for, there's the 2/3 majority. Principally, I'm not in favor of doing something now that would lower that threshold. I think whenever we raise taxes, that should have a high threshold, and I've stated before why that is, because I strongly believe, as is in our founding documents, that our property, whether it's how we make a living using our minds or our hands, the money we earn belongs to us. And when we give it up to pay for government, that's something that should have a high threshold, because it's a natural right we all have. And so the threshold should be very high. I've talked to people about, to give a comparison, if we're going to give up free speech rights, which are also a natural right, what kind of threshold would we want to take those away? So it's the same philosophy and same argument that would be made. So to now declare a fiscal emergency in order to lower the vote threshold, I'm not there. So that's my position right now.
All right. Other council comments? Keep in mind it needs to be a unanimous vote. Councilmember Royce?
Yeah. So I've been on council for 8 months, and within about 3 months, I realized kind of the financial situation that we were in. And a lot of this was already spoken in slides, but let me just emphasize a few key facts. It's been the writing on the wall for 3, 4, 5 years now that our revenues are pretty slow growing. We have 2 to 3% revenue growth. If we just look at our property tax and sales tax, over the last 3 years, we're around $14 million. We've been flat from 3 years ago. And that accounts for a big portion of the revenue the city brings in. If you look at our safety, which is police and fire, that makes up 53% of our general fund, we're growing on average of about 7% per year. And we really haven't done a lot of fancy spending. We have a safe town, and we have the people. We haven't grown people really at all through safety. In fact, we're down, and through city. But we do have to realize the cost per person has gone up in our organization and every one of your organizations. We have to pay people to live in the Bay Area. It's cost of living, and you have to pay them benefits. They're due medical insurance and pension. And so again, the issue isn't in growing. We're not hiring people. We're actually down in people. But, yeah, the cost per person is up, and we have to recognize that. With that, I made a statement before. This year will be the first year that the combined property tax and sales tax revenue of $14 million will not cover safety. It'll be short about $500,000. First year that has happened. With Vallejo, they had a situation where, of course, their numbers were more up, where ours were 53%. They were hovering around 60 to 62% for several years. Safety was controlled. It was up gradually. What happened to them is their revenues dropped significantly in 2 to 3 years. If our revenue dropped from $14 million to $10 million, which, by the way, I don't expect to happen. I think we have a good, stable base here in our city. But just say it did drop from 14 to 10, we would be up in that 72 to 76% where Vallejo is now, a percentage of safety to revenue coming in. So I'm not, here to talk about, fiscal emergency. It's just bare bone facts. I mean, as a financial person, expenses are growing twice as much as money coming in. If I was to run it, as one of the speakers said, to treat it as my own financial situation, it would have gotten my attention 3 years ago. Well, it has my attention this evening. That's what's most important. And we need to continue to be poor and meek and not hire any people or very, very little. We have to control our costs, but we also need a little bit of a help. I'll use the word help because this $3 million that this 0.5% will do will it's not going to hire people. It's not going to give us a community center. It's going to restore a little bit money to our capital fund, to our post-retirement medical, maybe reinstall adult sports, maybe, I don't know, but it's not going to be a growth factor where the city gets money and hires people. And I think it's really important for people to understand that. This is not a spending spree that we're doing. We're just trying to survive, and that's why we're doing it. And if I could just, in my last comments, jump to my feeling of the doing it now or doing it next year. Of course, I'd rather do something sooner than later. But what I really want to key in, what really hit me is, and I may be wrong on this, but I think we have a government that says it's majority on election years, and it's 2/3 on non-election years. That's the rule that was told to me a month ago. And I think some of that reason, there may be other reasons, but that in your general election years, you want the exposure, you want candidates running, you want people to talk about it around town. Well, let me tell you that Commissioner Omar over there and myself ran last year, and we knocked on almost every door in town. I know he did, and we did, and this was an election year, and when you go through list and we have a population of 28,000, and then you have eligible people who could vote, but then registered voters is only this much, and of the registered voters, we had 24%. He and I averaged less than 3,000 votes to be sitting here. Less than 3,000 votes of a population of 28,000. And when I think about waiting till an election year, well, I am disappointed in our voters' participation. And this November, we have a national election. And if we really want the voters of San Carlos to be able to have the opportunity to tell our story, to be able to bring them through some financial information and some charts and some understanding, which 90% of the people don't have out there, and let them decide by majority vote. But the voter participation would probably be more than double that in a national election. Then I would be very much in support. Because if I could tell you right there in the audience and at home that let's do it now so that we could have twice as many voters making the decision for San Carlos, I would rather do it sooner. And I would hope that it would be twice as much, because I'd like to get a heck of a lot more people signed up to vote in the city. And we could maybe encourage and get some excitement around here to make the city of the people of San Carlos run this city, because you're supposed to be running the city. And we're supposed to help. We're all supposed to be running the city. But participation in this process, to me, is really key.
Thank you. Councilman Rahman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a few general remarks. I would like to speak to some of the emails I've gotten. There have been a number of emails saying we need to cut more and get more efficient. I absolutely agree. There are things we can do to become more efficient. I got one email that I thought was particularly interesting. It said, you can't declare an emergency because we still have money to pay the bills. I'd argue the moment you don't have money to pay the bills, it's called bankruptcy. So I would prefer to declare an emergency before that. I'm a pilot. I've been a pilot for 20 years. When I get into my aircraft, my job is to ensure the safety of the aircraft, the crew, the passengers, the cargo. There's an interesting case that occurred in 1990 of a flight called Avianca Flight 52. It left Bogota, and it was flying to New York. It got stuck in fog and was held in a holding pattern outside of New York. The pilots made the following reports to the tower. We're low on fuel. We're really low on fuel. We're running out of gas. We are on fumes. They were finally cleared to land. They encountered wind shear, could not land, tried to get out of it, and ended up crashing 15 miles from New York. The interesting thing that did not occur, Mr. Mayor, they never declared a fuel emergency. If they had been in hold and declared the emergency, they would have been immediately cleared to land. From my perspective as a pilot, I look at what we've got, and it's fairly straightforward. We got about 3 years of runway, and then we're bankrupt. From my perspective, I'd rather declare this an emergency and take action. We do not have a sustainable budget in place, and I think there's been some interesting press around comments that have been made from this dais and where I stand. I think there's an interesting point, Mr. Mayor, of what do we believe as council members? One of our colleagues doesn't believe in global warming. I do. And I think I've finally come to the conclusion that one of my colleagues doesn't believe that we're in a fiscal emergency. I recall one specific comment during our workshop where, here's our list of cuts. It's fairly interesting. If the camera can see it, there was a line here. Here's all the cuts that we were recommended to do, and here's the cuts that we didn't want to do. And the game that was engaged in was something called horse trading, which was, you know what, I'm willing to take money out of something else and put it to someplace else. From my perspective, I didn't engage in that game. I said, no, we're here to cut and we're here to make the budget work. Horse trading means that you assume that there is plenty of money to go around. We just need to move it around. I think what I'll admit to getting fairly upset at the last meeting, and I can tell you that there is, if you've been on debate teams, you know that there is a specific tactic called the tactic of the faulty dilemma, that if you don't believe A, then B must be obvious. Groucho Marx had a great one. Have you stopped beating your wife? It's obviously a completely loopy question, but that was sort of posed, that if you don't believe in these particular things, then an emergency can't exist. It's a faulty dilemma. I admit it. I got upset. Mr. Mayor, in declaring an emergency, the question is now what? I don't declare an emergency lightly. I've never had to declare one in flight. When I got elected, I honestly never thought I'd have to declare one from here. But I'm going to state that we are in one. And what I want this council to do immediately, I think the police chief did a tremendous job in providing charts that showed us core services, secondary services, and then nice-to-have services. Those charts have now been made by all of our department heads. We need to rebuild our budget in that function and very clearly put the programs and people into those rings. To the extent that we have this goat rodeo every year of, what cuts make it and how we're going to do horse trading, I hate it. I think it's pathetic. And what I'd rather do is say, guess what? The outer ring costs this much. The core services cost this much. Guess what's going? It shouldn't be a confusing thing or too much lobbying that goes on in terms of what stays and what goes. The other thing we need to do, I got to know some of the folks in Belmont who got elected to city council, and they were kind enough to come out to our swearing in. So I went to their swearing in. I'll just relate one interesting point, that the incumbents who were on the dais before they came off, each one of them made a point of saying how proud they were that they got San Carlos to pay more for fire service. It was a point for every speaker. And you know what we did this year? We got San Carlos to pay more for fire service. We've got tremendous firefighters. They are brave people. we need to stand by them, but we've got 2 fire stations and they've got 2 fire stations. And right now we're paying several $100,000 more. That doesn't work. There's the budget. It's pretty clear. It doesn't work. We need to reopen this. Lastly, why am I saying that we need the sales tax? I would rather be in a position of cutting things because we make an informed decision and say this is no longer applicable, this is no longer the right thing to do, or we can have greater efficiencies. But instead, we will likely just have to do cuts because we have to do cuts. The last thing I do see, Mr. Mayor, as a fairly recurring theme is something that I agree with. People say we should learn to live within our means. I agree with that completely. And if we could put a glass dome around San Carlos and tell Sacramento that they should go a little further down the river from where they are, and if we could tell Washington, D.C. no longer to give us mandates, we might have a shot at it. But right now, the obligations that are being placed upon this city are not entirely our choice. For that reason, I am going to support this declaration of emergency. I will support this half-cent sales measure, and I will yield to the chair.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Grisilli?
A few comments. It was mentioned earlier about revenue, and of course one thing in government that I learned, as opposed to the private industry where a lot of us have come from or are in, is that you can't increase prices. If I could increase the price of this and try to sell it, I'd do it, but there's a city attorney over there and a bunch of laws telling me that I got to go through 18 hoops to do that. We're trying to work within those hoops tonight. It was mentioned tonight by one speaker that we have a systemic problem, and I 100% agree with that. It is a systemic problem, and it's been mentioned by my colleagues. Our expenses are going up faster than our revenue. And I go back to item number 1, how do we increase prices, as well as hopefully cut costs. Number 3, it's been mentioned the threshold of voters to do X, Y, and Z. And I mentioned in the newspaper, and I guess I'll repeat it, I thought it was a good line. If we needed 2/3 to get ourselves elected, I doubt any of us up here would be elected. As Mr. Royce said, in his race, 3,000 votes was enough. When Mr. Grocott, Mayor Lewis, and myself ran, 5,000 votes was approximately the threshold. There were more people voting. 66% hasn't always been there. I don't know what the time frame is. I know if I say 10 years, somebody will correct me, it's 20, and if I say 20, somebody will say 30. But I'm old enough to remember when the majority voted for X, Y, or Z, and that's what happened. Obviously, in this situation, as was also mentioned tonight, I think more than 5 people should decide this issue, and that's why I believe that we should have the item placed on the ballot, and whether someone is for the tax or against the tax, that's not our position at this point today. Our position is let the people decide what they want to do, and I do believe that with a higher turnout, as Mr. Royce said, you will get a much better indicator than at either a special election or at an off-year election. One of the things that I was going to propose tonight, if I make the motion or if the motion is made to put this on the ballot, is, and I have not talked to Mr. Royce about this because this was on our agenda and we're not allowed to speak to each other more than one person, and I already had spoken to one person about this. But I would propose that we set up a subcommittee, and I picked Mr. Royce and myself because we have financial background, but I would certainly be open to another member. There can no more than 2 of us because then it becomes more of a you can't have it. A subcommittee of myself and Mr. Royce to do literally an internal audit. And I know staff is just thrilled to hear me say that I can come in and start looking at their books. But to do more of a line by line, we get, as Councilmember Ahmad said, we have a stack of paper like this, and we try to go over the summary lines. But I'd like to go behind some of the summary lines. And I think Councilmember Royce and myself, with our experience in finance, can do it a lot easier than a lot of people just looking at bunches of numbers. So that's something I'm going to propose, assuming that the motion is made tonight, that I would like to add to it. That doesn't solve the immediate problem, but it does speak to the situation of I'm not just here to raise taxes.
I'm honestly here to try to see if we can cut in some items that we can. Because next spring, we will be going through this exercise, whatever we want to call it, but we'll be going through this exercise. I know you like that term. I don't quite like it. The other thing is, there's two more items and then I'm done. I think if we don't do this, I think what we're doing is throwing a pebble in the water. And if you throw a pebble in the water, it spreads out. And it doesn't just spread out here. This is going to impact the people that work in the city. It's going to impact the Chamber of Commerce and the businesses in the city. It's also going to impact our relationship with Belmont. And I'm not saying that our relationship with Belmont has been bad at all, because I think in the last year and a half, we've really made it a good relationship, and we've worked with them. But this means that we're going to have to look back to the fire situation, and we're going to have to replay that. Because if we're going to cut in this area in police, or we're going to cut in park and rec, or we're going to cut in administration, we're going to cut in fire too. Everybody's on the table here. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, everything's open for discussion. And I really believe that this thing is bigger than just looking at ourselves in a small microcosm. I think our council has changed over the past 3 years. I think before Mayor Lewis and myself were elected, and Councilmember Royce and Ahmad were elected, there was a different dynamic to this council. I think we worked together better over the last 3 years, the year and a half or whatever, all of us. We haven't always agreed, but I don't think it's always been a 4-1 vote. I think a lot of times it's been unanimous, or it's been 3-2, and I don't think you can say, well, this person is going to always vote with that person, or that person is going to always vote with this person. I think we've had open discussion. I think we've had respect, and I think we've been able to convince people of arguments perhaps that they didn't come in with. We've been consensus-oriented. I know I was on a planning commission for 6 years, and this is my 3rd year on a city council. I have sat up here at this dais in those 9 years and had a view when I stepped on the dais at 7 o'clock about how I was going to vote on a certain item. And I have listened to the people in the audience. I have listened to my fellow council members and Keller Commission members, and I have changed my mind. And I have gone and I have said this, I have been convinced by the argument, and I believe we should do this for the betterment of the city. And I encourage all of us to look at this and have that open-mindedness to say, you know, I have this principle or I have this idea, but I understand where the other people are coming from, and hopefully, you know, it can be carried through. I guess that pretty much covers all my comments, and I will yield to the mayor.
Thank you. A lot of good comments from the dais tonight, and I don't want to prolong things unnecessarily. That being said, I'll just truncate my comments to try to speak to some of the broader issues at hand from my perspective. I think Commissioner Thompson tonight, when he was retiring, we're giving him his award, you know, he said he thought that in San Carlos, the volunteer participation rate in town is much higher than most communities. And I attribute that to many things. I mean, it's a great community. People are involved. People care about San Carlos. But I also think that our local government's been more in touch with the citizens than any other local government that I have ever lived in and been a part of. We listed it a lot. There's been, I think, in the last couple of years, more green initiatives. I think there's been incredible interplay between staff, high citizen volunteer rate, and tons of commissions and committees. Council, I think, has all been extremely open to lots of different public involvement. It seems to really be working well. One of the fears for our fiscal situation is that as we as a local government have to withdraw from providing for the citizens, that we start to build the divides that exist in so many communities. And that's one of my deeper fears about our fiscal situation. I don't have some of the glowing analogies that other people may have from the dais. I will tell you, my dad would have sat us down and said, son, you got a fiscal emergency. And that's why everybody in the family is going to go to work. Our going to work is a multidimensional approach to our problem. It's not one thing. It's not one tax. It's everything. You know, it's a combination of East Side development, not just business development, but manufacturing development, the PAMP development, development downtown, fees, reduction in costs. Those are all fiduciary responsibilities. And one of the things I'm proudest of with this council is we are looking at everything. If anybody listened to the State of the City speech that I gave, I think it was in February, it was a fiscal emergency back then. Every number that you saw tonight, we've been grappling with for the last, certainly on a detailed level for the last 6 months. I don't believe anybody was surprised by these numbers tonight on any level. That's why there were no questions for staff. We've been deeply involved with them. I should say very few questions from staff. So I'm proud of the council's approach for that. We were dealt a fiscal emergency in 1978, 79, when one of the components of Proposition 13. I'm not talking about the overall tax rate. I would never talk about raising the overall property tax rate. When we talk about getting 11 cents back from the state, we were put into what I consider to be a higher fiscal threshold than any other community that surrounds us. When a neighboring community gets 25 cents back, we get 13 cents back. And after one more reduction for the state education, we get back 11 cents. You pay $1 of property tax, San Carlos gets 11 cents. You pay $1 of property tax in Belmont or Redwood City or Foster City, and they get 25 cents back to run their local government. They have to provide fire. They have to provide police, park and rec, twice as much money as San Carlos gets. I dare anyone in the audience, any citizen here, to look at one of those communities and say we don't feel like we do a better job with less than any other community in the peninsula. And it's a point of pride for, I think, for all of us. Well, we're turning the corner. And to say that we, to lower the threshold to 51% majority for a two-thirds majority, it happens all the time. That's part of going to the polls. We can do that as a political body, and you can respond as a citizen body with the fire parcel tax that 3 of the people on this council supported. That parcel tax was designed for a 51% majority. It's been supported here. There's philosophical inconsistency, and that's one of the things that I grapple with is we have to move forward together, and we have to be as consistent as we possibly can be. The survey does show a majority of the citizens have a good grasp on what we provide and what we need and support something like this. In my opinion, there is no doubt we have a fiscal emergency. There's no doubt the citizens are aware of it and willing to support the city. And there's no doubt that everybody in this room next year, when we go into budget talks, because I just want to say there is not one economic, we've all been looking at these economics for the last 12 months. No one on this dais, on the staff, has an answer, an economic answer to it. Nobody can say, here's the economic plan, we just need to do X, Y, and Z. It's multidimensional. It's very complicated. And that's where we are. And I hope tonight we have a motion. And that, even though there's been certain comments in the press, which may seem disrespectful to the body, because, frankly, we all do discuss really well as a group. And it's unfortunate when we have things that heighten the emotions on council because people tend to act differently than we've been acting. I've been proud of this council. I've been proud of the way that we tackle issues and disagree and agree and generally have a lot of mutual respect for one another. So I support it. I think everybody should support it. And I'm sorry for what is going to be happening over the course of the next 18 months if this has to wait to a general election, because I think it's going to be difficult for all of us. Thank you. With that, council, we're going to have further discussion or motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move for the adoption of resolution number 2008-48. A resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos establishing November 4, 2008 as the date for a special municipal election on a proposed ballot measure seeking voter approval to enact a 1/2 cent sales transaction and use tax for general fund purposes, establishing policies and procedures in connection with such an election, and requesting that the County of San Mateo conduct such an election.
I'd like to second that. Through the chair, Mr. City Attorney, can I add an amendment to that or an adjustment to that?
Be up to the maker of the motion.
I'd like to propose a subcommittee of myself and Mr. Royce to do an internal audit of the entire budget. As I said, I realize it's a time commitment, and I haven't asked Mr. Royce if he's even willing to do that. I don't know if he is or not.
Well, I've actually been trying to do some of that myself, so I would welcome your
Okay.
help.
I mean, I would like to add that again, as I said before, it's not only a thing to go to look at how to raise revenue, but how to cut costs. And I think both of us have enough experience to figure out how to possibly do that. So I would ask the proposer and the seconder if we could add that.
Any objection to that? That's fine.
So, Councilmember Griselli, just one question. We also talked a couple council meetings ago about having a finance subcommittee. Should that be maybe that would be up to Brad? Would it be a time to make the subcommittee, because that group would not only do auditing, but they would provide some kind of quarterly or semi-annual kind of financial update to the rest of council. Should we expand it to that or just leave it to auditing right now? Just throw that out.
That's right. Just for the sake of staying on issue, why don't we, if we want to add it, we can sort of further define what the scope of that subcommittee might be. If we want to, we'll keep it auditing for now. And if we want to broaden that scope, we'll go back to council.
I think that's better.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
the proposer and the seconder.
No objection.
And I'll second that.
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
Through the chair, yes. So for the matter of discussion, I've heard it said 3,000 votes to get elected. When I got elected the last time, reelected, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,400 votes. I would imagine that with the presidential election, it might be, let's say, 6,000 votes. Perhaps it's more. Who knows? We don't know.
Well, there'll be more than through the chair, there'll be more than 6,000 votes, I think, because what you'll have is, assuming you have like a 40% turnout, you'd have at least 7,000 to 8,000, I mean, just the numbers, there's approximately 18,000 registered voters in the city.
Yeah.
So if you had a 40% turnout, it would be, and they're expecting the highest turnout they've had in decades, it would be about 7,000 votes.
And our
Just
votes for
them.
sure.
So,
Yeah.
well, I understand that, Randy. So you're saying 7,000 voters?
Well, I'm thinking that it's going to be, whereas the time, if you have it the next time, as Mr. Roy said, it was about a 25% turnout of the registered voters, which basically made it about 3,000 to 4,000 approximately. So we think we're going to double. I mean, I personally believe it's going to go past 7, but I think conservatively at 40% would be 7,000 if you just go on registered voters.
Okay. So,
but I think,
way more than that.
Well, again, those are just the numbers that it could be way more than that. But the point is, it's going to be double, in my opinion, what you would have, at least double, if not more.
For fear of getting too far off subject here, I think what we're talking about, number of registered voters, number of people that voted, and then what the percentage of that vote is. Because, I mean, it's obvious where you're going with this. But I don't think, as I recall.
Tell me where I'm going.
Well, I don't think 5,400, I don't think you got 75% of the vote, if that's where you're going on the last election, right?
No, I'm not. That's
Okay,
not
sorry,
where I'm going.
please go for it.
What I'm trying to
I just
get
want to
at
state
is
this.
number of voters, because let's use the number of 6,000. Okay, let's just say 6,000 people vote. What you're talking about in a 50% plus 1 majority is 3,000 voters plus 1. And if you're talking a 2/3 majority, you're talking 4,000. So you're talking 1,000 more voters. Now, someone said that we need to take action tonight. And I've said earlier, I don't disagree with that. What I disagree with is declaring a fiscal emergency. So what I would be in favor of is going forward and putting it before the voters. I have no problem with putting it to the voters. I have a problem with declaring a fiscal emergency for the purpose of lowering the vote threshold from a 2/3 to 50% plus 1. So if I'm to vote in favor of this, I'll vote in favor of it if we don't declare the fiscal emergency. If we unravel this and unwrap it, and what I see here tonight is from people who argue that we've got to do this for whatever reason, whether it's the representatives of the employee unions or the city staff or whatever, saying you got to do this, then fine. There seems to be a pretty strong argument. Convince 1,000 voters, an additional 1,000 voters, that we either have a fiscal emergency or these are the cards we have on the table. These are the conditions, and get the thing passed.
I understand.
Okay.
Is there anything beyond that? And you said that earlier. We have a motion now, so I just don't want all the council members to restate their argument.
Okay. And I do have one question. That if
Mayor, let me finish.
Please. The question I have is that Mr. Grisilli has put in an additional statement measure onto what's been proposed by staff. So in the event that, let's say it's a 3-2 vote on this, just as an example, so it passes, but it doesn't meet, the one part of it doesn't meet the requirement to put it on the ballot because there's no fiscal emergency declared. That takes a 5-0 vote. But let's say it passes. Then does this audit committee move forward regardless of the fact that the other part does not move forward? That's a question for staff.
Yeah, I think the motion would fail, and then it would have to be restated. But if staff needs to clarify that further than that, please feel free.
Don't want to interfere with the council's discussion, but it's been said several times, and I just wanted to correct it from a legal standpoint, okay? A special tax requires a 2/3 vote. You can have a special tax anytime you want, you know, and any one of the election dates during the year you can hold a special tax. And it requires a 2/3 vote, but it's a special tax. It's for a particular purpose. The tax that's before you tonight in the resolution is for a general tax. It only requires 50% vote, and it can only be held at the time of the general municipal election. You have an opportunity to move it up by declaring a fiscal emergency. But you're not, to say you're lowering the standards for the general vote, it's not true. It's still 50%, whether you hold the election this year or next year. All you're doing is moving it up a year. It's not that you're lowering the standard for a general tax. That's the point I wanted to make.
Thanks for the clarification. Do you have other questions or comments on any other discussion or on the motion?
Let me just clarify, please. Maybe I'm repeating a little bit what our city attorney just said, but yeah, I look at this, you know, whether or not you have a special or a general. This exact tax would fluctuate every other year between 2/3 and 50%, depending on what year. And I can't understand, or if anybody could explain to me, what the difference of threshold would be one year to another, except for a guess that I made during my talk. So just because of timing, and again, the emphasis that I would put is a sense of urgency here that we have. I don't call it emergency. I call it a sense of what I saw 3 months into council, that we needed to start moving levers here. We need to move the expense lever. We need to move the revenue to be a safe, healthy San Carlos the way we know it now.
Okay. Any other comments? With that, we have a motion before us. Christine?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Lewis?
Yes. And with that, we will move on to our next item, which is item number 11A, consideration of we'll take just a pause here for some exiting. All right. Item number 11A, consideration of approving finance agreement between the South Bayside System Authority, SBSA, and the City of San Carlos.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the item in the front of you is regarding the wastewater treatment plant that serves cities of Belmont, Redwood City, San Carlos, and West Bay Sanitation District. The plant was constructed in late 1970s and went in operation 1980. And for the last 28 years, the plant really, the components and the parts and everything has not been replaced and is in need of replacement, including the pump stations, including San Carlos Pump Station, which is located across from the Hillard Museum. SBSA staff, general manager and staff and their consultants have put a capital improvement program together and has been approved by the board of directors. The total cost of that program is approximately over $400 million. San Carlos' share is approximately $57.1 million, including replacement of San Carlos Pump Station. In order to provide more detail to the City Council, I'd like to introduce the General Manager of SBSA, Mr. Dan Child, which have a PowerPoint presentation for the Council.
Go. Nope, still on the old one. You want me to go? It was here earlier. What the heck? Okay. SPSA right there. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Mayor and council members, I'm pleased to be here with you this evening. As Parviz stated, my name is Dan Child. I'm the manager of the South Bayside System Authority. I've been on this job now for about 2 years, and when I first took the job a couple of years ago, I walked in and took a tour of the facility and was absolutely dismayed at what I found as far as the condition of the facilities. Previous management had deferred maintenance over many years, and this isn't something that's just an SBSA problem. It's really a nationwide problem. In the state of California alone, there's estimated to be $12.9 billion worth of work needed in the next 5 years. So we're not alone in this one, and we need to address it, and that's what I've been working on basically for 2 years. As Parviz stated, SBSA was formed as a joint powers authority in 1975. It encompasses the city of San Carlos, Redwood City, city of Belmont, and the West Bay Sanitary District, which is a big chunk of Menlo Park. All of the ownership is based on the percentage of flow that was anticipated to come from each entity, and as you can see, San Carlos owns approximately 14% of the facility. The CIP, the Capital Improvement Program, is addressing several issues. The first is replacement of all 3 of the city's pump stations. Many of these pump stations are older than SBSA itself. The San Carlos pump station is one of the relatively newer ones. However, it has outgrown its capacities, and it's wearing out to the point that we really need to replace that pump station and the type of pumps. Significant corrosion is a big problem we've had. A lot of this facility was built in bay mud, and the technology of the 70s to protect concrete and steel structures from corrosion wasn't as good. There's new technologies out there today. We've experimented in the last 10 years with some technologies to protect the steel parts of the buildings and of the structures, and have come up with a polyurethane-based material now that seems to be lasting. Well, we haven't reached a failure point in over 10 years, so it's looking pretty good from that standpoint. Fixed film reactors, some of you may have been out there. If you haven't been out to our facility, I'd really encourage you to give me a call and come out and take a tour so you can see what we're operating for you. It's really quite a facility. But fixed film reactors are the big towers when you get out there, and the water is literally distributed over the top of these, and the bacteria in these tanks consume the pollutants out of the water. Those have a plastic media in them that was designed for a 15-year lifespan. It's now 28 years old and is starting to collapse on itself. We have not had a catastrophic failure and don't anticipate one, and I'm not here tonight to tell you that tomorrow everything's going to fall apart, but we are getting to the point that the redundant facilities have been consumed. We don't have things to keep us running next week if something does fail. We're putting out fires rather than planning how to maintain these facilities. Automation system needs to be repaired and updated. That's one area where we anticipate savings. Right now, because of the lack of automation, we have to staff the facility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The automation upgrades and repairs will allow us to reduce staffing from 24 hours to just 1 staff a day, 7 days a week. So that allows us to save a lot. We're anticipating a reduction of 10 head counts by automating that out there. The control and administration building, we always hate to replace buildings. Unfortunately, our plant is a stacked design. There's a process on top of a process, and then the administration building is on top of that. Unfortunately, they designed the administration building and placed it on top of the biggest generator of hydrogen sulfide in the entire treatment process. So hydrogen sulfide, when it mixes with water, creates sulfuric acid. Back in the 70s, the big push was to build with steel studs. Well, sulfuric acid and steel studs, we've got literally knocked holes through the walls to check it out, and the studs are 4 inches off the ground. They've just corroded away. The building's being held up with sheetrock and plaster right now, so that building does need to be replaced. The common peak wet weather pumping capacity.
That part on the tour when we're there going upstairs, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Yep. You remember. The peak wet weather pumping capacity. At this point, there are times in every city and every entity that we serve, when you have a big storm, you have a maximum peak wet weather flow that can come to our facility. And if you exceed that flow, we have to start shutting gates to your pump stations. That backs raw sewage up into your city's collection systems. We have done that over the last 10 years to every single one of your cities. To date, we've not had a spill. We've been able to manage that, and we anticipate, hopefully, we'll continue to manage that. However, we need to increase our peak wet weather capacity system, and when I say increase it, we need to repair it back to the way it was. It was originally designed to handle 70 million gallons per day. Right now, we're able to get just a little over 60 million gallons a day through it. The pumps and this infrastructure is just worn out. And the force main itself, the force main was originally built as the outfall line, the line that took the treated water out to the bay from the old San Carlos pump or treatment plant and the Redwood City treatment plant. And when SBSA was formed, they decided to turn that into the force main to take the sewage out to the new treatment plant. That line was designed for 12 pounds per square inch of operating pressure. We run it during wet weather events at 23 pounds of pressure. This is a 54-inch diameter concrete line with one O-ring at each 12-foot junction. We've had some failures, none catastrophic. One was really close. It was actually just outside the Belmont pump station, and we had raw sewage on the runway at the airport at one point, but that hopefully has been corrected and won't happen again. So the biggest issue right now are the pump stations. They're all 40-plus years old. The equipment's worn out. It's fallen apart. They're not reliable to pump the flow, especially during peak wet weather. We have actually begun projects at this point. We've started hiring engineers, architects, and consultants to start the process, but it's not something that we can really wait for much longer. At this point, I was going to turn the time over to our financial consultant. However, he has decided to go on vacation, so I got left with the assignment today. So I'm just going to go on quickly to what this means for the city. It's a 10-year CIP, have annual funding needs. We're looking at a bond sale this year to be able to get it going. The financing agreement before you today is part of that bond sale. SBSA, as a joint powers authority, has the authority in the agreement to issue bonds and raise rates and to levy charges back to the cities to pay for that. Obviously, we want to make sure everybody's on board before we do that. But the financing agreement before you tonight is nothing more than a cleanup of the legal language in today's more modern language to make sure everything's in place to facilitate those bonds. As far as cost goes, this is a graph that shows San Carlos's $57 million share of the $400 million project over the next 10 years. These numbers have been inflated at a 4% annual construction cost rate. So yeah, I want to stress the CIP is a budget at this time. There's no firm costs. We believe that we've been conservative in our numbers, that we're not being outlandish in saying we need a lot more than we do, but we don't anticipate there will be a need to ever come back. We feel like these numbers will do the work we need to do. We put 40% of any project's costs into the first year of the project, with 60% in subsequent years, and as I said, a 4% increase. And if you look, basically the blue lines, let's see if I can get the mouse, the blue is the treatment plant costs, what we need to invest in the treatment plant directly on a year-by-year basis, with the orange being what we call a conveyance system, which is really the force main, the big pipe. And the green is the pump station. And as you can see, the pump stations are loaded right on the first 2 years. The wastewater treatment plant is pretty much spread out fairly evenly, a little bit heavy on the first couple of years, and then followed by the orange system. The conveyance system, we don't anticipate construction due to environmental requirements until 5 or 6 years from now. The little bit of orange in the first is the start of the engineering studies, the siting plans to be able to put this project together, get through the environmental work to make that work happen. This would be San Carlos' share of the CIP debt service. We're looking at two sources of revenue. One is bonding on revenue bonds. The other is what's called State Revolving Fund. The State Revolving Fund was created by the Clean Water Act in 1972, which it's a combination of state grants, federal grants, and general obligation bonds that the state can issue. The nice thing about them, there's really two great points. First is the interest rate is half of the state's general obligation bond rate at any given time. So if the general obligation bond rate today is around 5%, the lending rate today is about 2.5%. The second big advantage is that you don't have to start making payments until 1 year after completion of the project. So instead of you borrow the money today on a bond, you start making payments immediately. If you borrow on the state revolving fund, you don't start paying until a year after the project is finalized and complete. So there's some big advantages in accrued interest there, obviously. The disadvantage and the hang-up that we have with state revolving fund is anything that has been previously grant funded is not eligible. Mr. Ahmad's reaction is exactly right. The SBSA was 87.5% grant funded back in 1979, 1980 when they built it. Now, I say that, and I need to qualify that it is just the treatment plant portions that were grant funded and some parts of the pump stations. We've been working with the State Revolving Fund staff, and there are eligible parts, the force main work, which is almost a third, almost 40% of the total cost of the CIP. That was not done with grant funds. Some of the pump stations were not done with grant funds. Most of the automation was not done with grant funds. So there are eligible parts. We're estimating probably 60% is eligible. So that's a good thing. It takes a while. I just got a report today. The state currently has $12.9 billion of requests for that money. And this last year they've allocated $258 million. So they're about $12.5 billion short of what they are going to need over the next few years. But they're telling us, come on, they want our job, they want our project. So that's encouraging. We're moving along that way. The one thing that doesn't go out here is I don't want to give you the misconception that in 2018 you pay $4.2 million for debt service and you're done. These are 25-year bonds. So there's 25 years of debt service. The debt service will level out at $4.2 million for the remaining 15 years of that bond. So the reason it's going up gradually is because as we borrow the money as we go. The final slide I have shows San Carlos' projected total SBSA funding needs over the next 10 years. The dark blue portion is your current operating budget. This is what you're paying right now, $2.4 million a year for services, and it's expected to go up to $4 million in the next 10 years. And on top of that is the previous graph that we just looked at. So in 2018, you're looking at $8.2 million worth of charges that need to be paid between the debt service for the CIP bonds and loans and the operating funds. the CIP is accounting for about 75% of the total increase as we go through it. So it's a big chunk of money. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. If you have questions, I'd be more than happy to try and answer them.
Thank you. Council, questions?
Mr. Mayor, I do have a couple of questions. We went from taxes to sewage, so.
Still money.
One of the questions came up, so we've got 3 pump stations, and I'm also sort of obliquely looking at Mr. McCarty. There was some discussion some months ago about a particular pump station that had 3 pumps that was going to be replaced with a 4th with 3 acting as a backup. Can you just give us a layout of sort of where the pump stations are and what status they're in?
The St. Carlos pump station, the existing pump station has 3 pumps. Initially, when consultants put the program together, they thought these 3 pumps have to be replaced, and by the way, you need a 4th pump. And when we look at that, really those pumps, I would call them the dinosaurs. You know, they're 1979. So the best way to do it is a submersible pump. So basically, we're not going to be using in the future those pumps. A new pump station will be constructed outside of the building, submersible pump that is much more superior and more efficient and requires less maintenance than these pumps, and it costs less than replacing these pumps. So that decision that we made, and the consultants agreed, and Mr. Charlie agreed, that's what we will do.
Yeah. So again, when I understood, there are 3 pumps in one facility, but they're not 3 facilities.
We actually have 4 total pump stations, but only one that is San Carlos's responsibility. The other, we have a Redwood City pump station, a Belmont pump station, San Carlos, and West Bay. So, and the San Carlos one is the one you're concerned about that has the 3 pumps in it. And one thing I do need to stress again is we are not in the design phase. This is purely budget-driven, putting together a project that we can go forward and start getting money in place and a plan in place to address all these things. We still have to get the engineers on board. We still have to design it. And at that point, we'll know exactly what these pump stations are going to look like. Up until now, it's really been, this is what we think is going to be needed based on the best, engineering and staff information available.
And just also to verify, SBSA jurisdiction will start at the pump station and go to the treatment facility. San Carlos is responsible for all plumbing going to that pump facility.
Exactly.
So now I want to look at Mr. Macari and say, what I don't see in this is maintenance and infrastructure improvements that we may need to make to San Carlos infrastructure.
You will see it in the projection of the rates that we put in the staff report. It's all the components, all the costs, and the projected revenues are in that chart.
I stand corrected. No questions.
Yeah. Mr. Trowell, first question is, I noticed Belmont was 9%, San Carlos 14%, and that was based on volume of flow. Is that a current number, and I'm curious why I think our populations are about the same size at all, but that's a significant difference.
It is. It's interesting. Those numbers were actually based on what the people back in 1975 projected as needs and what each city purchased for capacity.
Okay.
However, over the years, the actual flows have tended to track very close to that. And like I said, the 2 cities tend to be very close to the same size. I don't know why that is, but it is.
We have more restaurants.
Really?
Restaurants, hotels.
Well, because I'm just thinking if all, this is $57 million, unless everybody's a double flush in San Carlos, I would like to understand that allocation. This is big money, and I need to understand that.
Through the chair. It is true that San Carlos share was based on 3.7 million gallons per day flow. And San Carlos is not using all of that. So the advantage of that is you have some reserve for future development. You have calculated all of that. San Carlos, all build out and everything we're purchasing from this bid for future capacity, San Carlos for years does not have to purchase additional capacity.
But it's good to have the capacity, but are we paying for it before we're using it?
We pay based on flow. Everything that goes there, we pay for, not based on 3.7 million.
You are paying for the capital portion of it before you use it, yes.
For the capital, yes.
For the operation and maintenance on a
Right.
daily basis.
So we are paying more to buy that capacity.
True.
Okay. So my second thoughts are just,
Can I just tag on that? So, but you're saying that the flows represent closely those percentages?
Yes. On a day in,
I
day out
wanna
basis.
understand
it's
why.
pretty close.
Before we get locked into.
Do you have any guesses why? Sure, I understand. I'm just wondering, do you have any guesses why?
Industrial area of San Carlos, more restaurant, industrial users use a lot, and then, for example, Palo Alto Medical Foundation comes on board, you're going to see substantial increases in the flow. So San Carlos commercial industrial area flow is much higher than Belmont.
Okay. But again, I'd like to, I think a real key point here, if we're paying capital based on that number, I want to make sure it's close.
Yeah,
Because
well,
the capital is the most significant part of this cash flow.
Yeah, that's true. And these percentages were all determined by the joint powers agreement that was
Right.
entered into back in 1975. So
Okay.
they're kind of, nothing set in stone, but it,
Yeah.
it would be something that if the city of San Carlos did not want that much, they could approach other agencies to possibly buy their shares. And there may be interest out there for more capacity in other cities, but it's, they're pretty much locked in by this joint powers agreement that was signed in 1975.
And by the way, the flow from San Carlos, the other part of it is San Carlos serves 4 county sanitation districts.
That's it.
Out of unincorporated areas, Devonshire, Canyon, Emerald Lake, Harbor Industrial, those are all extra outside of city limit that San Carlos provides capacity.
Okay. I
That
just
would be a big
want to make
chunk
sure
of it.
we
That makes sense.
look
I
at that.
forgot about
Right.
that.
Okay, and my second point then is, and I'm glad you've come on board here. Your first sentence was, "I was amazed at what you saw," because, and the trouble I have is I look at something that's been around for 30 or 40 years with a management, with a CFO, with a JPA membership that has operated, has an operation running, put no reserves away. I don't have, faith in, how efficient they are. They haven't replaced anything. They've seen a lot of this stuff happening. I mean, I'm feeling pretty good, City of San Carlos, versus what I see here from the previous agenda item here.
Yes.
But, structurally, though, do we still have, without getting into the names, is the management, I know you're new, but the CFO, the management, the JPM members still the same, and they are the ones who are put together these numbers for us now to approve $57 million?
No.
Because I don't have any faith in anybody that was involved in this.
We've done a couple of things. One is, up until about 3 years ago, there was no CFO. They didn't have one.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm a new manager. The manager that was before me, and I don't want to criticize them because in a lot of ways, they're not alone. Like as I started out, there's a tendency with these clean water plants that were built in the late 70s, early 80s, and you'll find it throughout the country that they were grant funded. People had really low rates for sewer because of the grant funding. And the desire to keep those rates low tended to override the need to put some money away and to invest in these facilities. And that's exactly what happened here. Before I came to SBSA, I was aware of SBSA. I work in the state of California, and I would hear about this great plant. The SBSA plants won national awards for the best treatment plant in the country. But they were doing it by consuming the redundant processes that were there. There were in places where you had 3 pumps and you only needed 2. When something would break, they'd say, "Well, we still got 3. There's no reason to fix it." And that was the general attitude. And like I said, they're not alone. The maintenance manager that is no longer the maintenance manager, but before he changed jobs, he came to me and said, "For years when I've got this job, I would go in and ask for $500,000 a year in maintenance funds. It would come back to me after an approved budget at $50,000. He said, "After the 3rd year, I gave up." Yeah, and that's not a good thing to say, but it was reality. Management in place now has totally changed. Our commission members have totally changed. There's a real dedication on their part. They are aware of this. Like I said, I was amazed. I started on April 3rd. I went into my first commission meeting on April 10th and told them we have a problem. Actually, it was April 11th. No, April 13th. Anyway, went in there and told them we have a problem. I'll be back in a month. I came back at our May meeting and outlined the need for the capital improvement program. And since that time, in May of 2006, we have been developing this program with 100% support of the commissioners and changes in staff to get us there.
Okay.
So it's a totally different organization.
The word
today.
totally sounds really good. And so then my last thought would be maybe when Council Member Grisilli talks, I'd like to get your thoughts on, so what we put together here, I guess you said you had a financial consultant and so forth. I would just like to have some confidence that someone's put a sharp pencil or a sheetrock knife to this thing to really look at the capital costs, look at the building costs. Even I see 2 more maintenance workers. You talked about a lot of automation. I mean, I see a Chevron refinery plant being built with, I'm exaggerating, 2 people run a refinery. I mean, how many people are there? I mean, I don't want the answer to that. But when I see 2 more people, more of this, more of that.
Two is city, not
they're
the
not
treatment
us.
plant.
Oh, that's for city? I'll talk about that later then. Okay, thank you. But I guess I'd like to have Bob, you talk just a little bit about the confidence you have in this financial projection.
Sure. And let Mr. Grubb have any questions first.
Thank you very much, and welcome aboard. It's a pleasure to have you on this thing right now. Thank you.
He's my replacement.
Thank you. Councilmember Brokaw?
Thank you.
And I've been there.
I think most of us have been out there then. I went out there.
I'm a contributor, by the way, too.
I think all of you are.
By the way, when I was out there, there's certain styles of architecture. It's amazing to me how much that place does look like it was built in the 70s. You would think with a sewage treatment plant, what style is there, but it definitely looks like something from the 70s. And welcome on board, and I'm glad to have you. I appreciate your report. It's very clear and thorough.
Thank you.
So I like the way you put this together. Just had a couple of questions. One is I was struggling to understand of the 57.1, how much of that is actually finance cost versus money that's going to go into the ground, into the building, and so forth, or into the pumps and whatnot.
The 57.1 is pure principal.
That's pure principal?
Pure principal.
Okay, so the finance costs are on top of that? Okay. But you're getting this special rate on, if I understood you, about 40% of the work with the...
We're estimating roughly 40 to 50%, yes.
Is going to get the very low interest rate?
Hopefully that
Hopefully.
it's not, nothing's guaranteed. It's a state program. It's 1/2 of the state's current GO bond rate, which right now is 5%, so it'd be roughly 2.5%. That changes as the market changes, the state's bond rating changes. But
okay. By the way, somebody needs to turn off their BlackBerry or cell phone or something.
That's
where
probably me.
Okay, that's where we're getting that interference. Then 2 more questions. Let me put it in terms of an example. If you live on a street that, say, doesn't have a sewer line, everybody's on septic, and then somebody decides, well, we're not going to allow any more development except that's on a sewer line. So some guys, up the road, I've seen this happen in the county. Some guy's up the road, a mile, he wants to build a house. The county says, you got to now be on sewer. So he has to pay to put in that line from where it stops to where he's going to tie in. And he's passing, 25 parcels on the way. And his question is, well, why do I have to pay for it all? And the answer is, well, you don't. When other people tie in, they will pay. And there's a system for that. I think you understand what I'm referring to, Mr. McTarry. So the question is, how does future development buy into this program and pay their fair share?
When a developer has to pay the total cost of the sewer line and it passes by another 20 parcels will be an agreement signed between the developer and all the other property owners will be notified between the developer and the city for a period of, you said the sunset, 10 years or 15 years. If any other property owner on this line tries to construct a residential unit, they have to pay their share of the cost of the total project to the initial.
Right, so I was giving that as an example of how that works. How does it work in this case where we're making capital improvements to something that's out on the bay, but it seems to me future development has an impact on sewage treatment. We're paying long-term for something, so how do they buy into that?
SBSA has what is referred to as a capacity charge on a per-gallon basis. Whenever a new development connects, they purchase so many gallons of capacity based on what they're building, and the city determines that. I don't know exactly how San Carlos's ordinance is written, but a lot of times by fixture counts or square footage or how, some way of equalizing that.
So in San Carlos, the capacity fee set by the city council ordinance is $4,500 for every 270 gallons. And we estimate every residential unit uses 270 gallons. So every residential unit pays to the city of San Carlos $4,500. Out of that, approximately $2,200 will go to SBSA to purchase capacity. The balance goes towards city's capital improvement program.
So the $2,200 then is somehow paying into the future, because what we're doing here is we're taking future costs, right, and we're estimating. Mr. Chade showed how in the beginning years we're spending a lot more money than we're going to be spending in later years, but we're not going to pay that way. We're going to pay something more level. Well, you showed it ramping up, but then it levels off.
Right.
So what that shows me is, you're not paying right up front, but everybody that's in the bus at the time is paying their fare. What do you do about people who get on the bus later?
I think,
and I'm sorry, if I can just to clarify the point, you said the $2,200 goes back, but does that go to the capital fund, or does that go to the operating budget?
it
Goes
goes
for future capacity.
Yes, I need to clarify a couple things. The $2,200 goes to future capacity, so it does not come into play here. Where this comes into play is in your monthly service fees or your annual sewer service fee on your tax roll, and a new connection would automatically start paying into that. The day they start getting service, they would start paying into that just like any other customer would.
That's the part I'm struggling with, I guess, is if you tie in year 10 on the last day of that year, you hardly pay for any of this, but you get the benefit of this whole program.
Yeah, it's one of the things in public financing that's hard to get by is the people that are on the system are the ones that pay for it today. Now, the other side of that is they've benefited from the last 28 years of a system that they haven't been paying for. So it
all comes out in the wash, as they say.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. And then the last question, just to understand what it is we're approving, as you said, we're not approving necessarily all these numbers. We're approving just an agreement, and as you said, cleaning up language and so forth.
Exactly.
We'll see all this later.
You'll
You're just
see
giving
all
this as
later
background.
as we go. This is going to facilitate us being able to go forward with this first bond issue. The state revolving fund money is not available quick enough to do that, so we'll go with a bond issue first, and then as things progress each year, we'll be back telling you what our plans are for the future year and what we're planning on doing.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, to that point, we are approving a financing budget tonight that you would go forward with.
This financing agreement basically says City of San Carlos will pay its share of the cost of the financing and the operation and maintenance of the treatment plant.
Technically, the SBSA Commission approves the budget every year and how much they'll go forward with. However, as my personal belief and the Commission's belief is that we need to come back every year and make sure everyone understands where we're going, where we've been, what we've done.
Right, but
So you're not technically approving a dollar amount. That's really the SBSA Commission's responsibility. You're just committing that you will pay it back, is all.
So we're setting for some threshold for a dollar amount, which are these numbers, and the SBSA can then continue to confirm for us. But there is a commitment in this tonight.
True.
Okay. And I have other comments, but I'll wait for Vice Mayor Grisilli. Just
I don't, you know, I was selected for this, subtly selected and got on in November, and of course had the same reaction as Commissioner Royce. What the heck has been going on for 30 years? We have representative from a council person from Redwood City, a council person from Belmont, myself, and then a representative of the West Side Sanitation District, which is a duly elected board down in that area. They're elected. And we're working with Mr. Child and his staff to go through this. And as the mayor indicated, we're just proposing, we're just approving tonight the commitment that we're going to be part of this game and we're going to pay our fair share. And estimated today is $57 million. That's an estimate, as Mr. Child said, hasn't been designed, hasn't been engineered. They feel like that's right in the ballpark of what it's going to be. But we're basically, because we're a joint power, it's not like we can say, well, we don't want to play. I mean, it's almost a fait accompli in one sense. We can say, well, we don't want to improve the plant, and that would be extremely short-sighted. I mean, we're just, I'm finally, sort of happy that we're finally figuring out after 28 years that we need to have a sinking fund to replace. And as I understand it, as we're in our budget, just as an aside, in our regular budget for the SBSA, we are going to have, I think, this year, and we'll continue in the future years, to set aside reserve funds.
That is correct.
Right. I just want to make sure everybody understands that we're not just doing this, and by the way, in 25 years, we're going to be back again. I mean, we're trying to do that. I'm also very complimentary of the fact that, as at least Mayor Lewis and Mr. Grocott remember, we raised our sewer rates substantially, 12%, 31%, whatever the numbers were, and at that time I remember saying, can't we even these things out? And it appears that we're trying to do that to be more reasonable so that we don't have these double-digit numbers come flying out and people have some idea of what they're going to pay. But I don't really have any questions because I was involved in a lot of these things, but I can answer any questions that you all might have. Just from my perspective, trying to, be a partner of a joint powers agreement, that our next, also to let you know that after we get through this and hopefully in a month or two get this going, one of my big things is, okay, it's time to look at a 32-year-old or whatever it is, joint powers agreement that needs to be looked at. I mean, there's some archaic language in that and some other things, and we got to make sure that our flows are right and our percentages are right and whatever, so that we can move forward in the 21st century.
Mr. Grisilli, at the staff level, we've begun that process.
Right, I know you have, and I'm just talking from our level.
Further,
we haven't seen it yet, and so just to give the council some assurance that we're not just sitting there going, well, we got this 30-some-odd-year agreement, and it'll be great forever. So anyway, if you have any questions.
So my question is really one of process, because there's no doubt this has to happen in some way, shape, or form. I mean, to me, that's pretty clear. But I'm always reticent to approve big numbers when there's not a design that's not been engineered and we don't know final financing costs. It seems, and feel free to, educate me after I'm done here, but is there a way that this could step forward more gradually? Like, generally when we do these projects, there's a design phase, and then there's a financing phase, that you understand what the long-term implications are of 10 years of bonds and financing and so forth, and the design incorporates engineering that, in other words, it feels like we're going for finance and we have a lot of outstanding questions.
You're 100% correct. This is basically a master plan type of document at this point where we're putting together, there's 131 projects identified in this master plan. In order to progress with these, as Mr. Royce pointed out, we have no reserves. So even the hire engineers and that type of people, we need money now to be able to make that happen. I've started the process of hiring them, but I haven't signed any contracts yet because I don't have any money to pay anybody yet. So it's a little bit of the cart ahead of the horse. However, each project will go through a design phase, will go through a finance phase where the commission, the SBSA commission, which Mr. Griselli is one of the members of, will approve that on a project-by-project basis. So they will be very up to date. I'm more than willing to come back and give you, quarterly, semi-annual, annual, whatever type of updates you'd like and feel comfortable with, and keep you up to date on those type of things. But there really isn't, I guess, as Mr. Griselli, it's almost you don't have a choice type of situation because we're so far behind the 8 ball right now. Right. At the same time, the JPA, in essence, not even in essence, the JPA does give the SBSA Commission the authority to go out and get these bonds, and so it's it's a little bit of a going in circles type of a process because of the joint powers agreement.
Sure.
But
and I understand you're new to it, but it's really hard. It's almost like you've given millions of dollars to somebody, and then it was evidently sort of almost irresponsibly utilized, and it's like, oh, just give us another $50 million, we'll get it right this time. It's like,
and to give you an idea, I'm sorry.
Well, all I want to say is it possible that you could break this into like milestones? In other words, I'm just a little reluctant to commit to say we're going to go $55 million over the next 10 years, or roughly that number. I understand you're saying, hey, there's 130 projects, we're going to bid them all out, we'll come back and we'll give updates. But as far as a commitment from the City of San Carlos, was there consideration given to phases of the project? So they're identified, we come back 6 months, we look at them, we're now going to help approve that phase, not as detailed as the board's going to look at it, but perhaps for this sizable commitment.
Through the chair, again, I apologize, but in effect, you don't have a choice. We got to have a sewage treatment plant. If it costs $57 million, or if it costs $500 million, we have. I think what we're trying to approve tonight is the concept of we want to be in this joint powers agreement, and we want to replace the sewer plant. Now they're going to tell us what it's going to cost, and if we don't want to do that, that's fine. But then I don't know what we're going to do.
That's not the argument I'm making. What I'm saying is there's two separate things going on. One is the improvement of sewer treatment plant, $55 million, but then there's 130 projects. We don't know the design of the engineering or the financing commitment. And I'm sorry, all I'm saying is I don't think it's too much to ask for perhaps some milestone phase check-ins where it's qualified commitment. Of course we want to be a part of it. That's not the
but
question.
I'm just saying, Mr. Mayor, you're absolutely correct. But they have done the projection of the financing over the years is based on, okay, this is the projects, consultants and Dan's staff, everybody, including city staff. We look at, okay, this much we can do first year. So based on this much, engineering and design, for example, pump stations have to be done the first 2 years. Based on that, they estimated this is how much we need the first 2 years. If we don't do those things the first 2 years, then the third year, amounts will change.
We're in business. I got you. So the first 2 years, let's commit to the first 2 years. But
it's been done, but it's not casting point because if you run into problems, environmental issues or something is delayed, of course, Dan will report to the board and city staff will report to the council as well.
I didn't come prepared tonight to talk about those milestones, but if you'd like to have a workshop or something, I would be glad to sit down because really most of that stuff is in place. I think it would really make you more comfortable, or I can send information to you, whichever you'd prefer. But most what you're discussing really has been gone through and talked about and how we're going to manage it. And like I said, I didn't bring the slides or anything to really be able to explain that tonight, but it certainly has been discussed and is pretty in place. Now, is everything going to go exactly as we foresee it's going to go? No way. It's too big. There's going to be changes, and we have committed to our commission that we will do an annual update of the program, and that would be a perfect time to come back and say, these are the milestones we've hit, these are where we're going in the next year, the next 5 years, and be able to show you those type of things. I'm more than willing to commit to that.
Okay. I won't prolong the discussion. Thank you. Council? Other questions, thoughts?
Mr. Mayor? The question I had was whether any of the other members of the JPA have approved this agreement yet.
At this point, no. It's on everyone's agendas. Belmont's next week. Redwood City is a couple of weeks after that, and West Bay is on the 18th of August. But they've all have done as our legal attorney or our legal bond counsel put together a draft agreement, has sent it out. Everyone has come back with their comments. We've modified it according to the comments, and everyone seems to be, it's just a matter of getting through their systems. So you guys are the first ones to be ready to do this.
I would indicate to the mayor that we have reviewed the agreement. There were changes made. I'm not aware of the changes that might have been made. Belmont hired special counsel. I don't know if the changes that Mr. Colantuano might have suggested, I haven't seen those suggested changes.
One thing I didn't talk about, I'm sorry, each member entity has a totally separate agreement. So your agreement does not necessarily reflect exactly what each agency does. One thing I didn't cover back then.
That's interesting.
That gives him some heartburn. Okay. Each agency has a choice of how they want to finance this. If they have the choice, they don't have to even participate in this bond. You don't have to participate. As the commissions approve the project, we can go forward, we can issue bonds, and SBSA would send a bill out to the member entities, and how you choose to pay it's totally up to you. The commission felt that it was in the best interest to go together as a group, and that's the recommendation that's has come back. Each entity also has the choice, do you want to finance it over 25 years? Do you want to finance it over 10 years? Do you want to go 30 years? Those types of things are entity by entity decisions.
So that just brings up a question for me, City Manager Weiss. If we were aware of that flexibility, did we do a financial analysis of it and decide that this was the best financial formula for San Carlos?
I mean, we've looked at it from the term of being able to ensure that the rates are not going to go up more than 10% in any given year. So we've tried to flatten the rates. Now, we've met with their bond counsel. We met with their financial agents and talked with them about, alternative methods, and have determined that this schematic is a way that we can address the issue and keep the rates from spiking and the like. But, and because of that, this is the format that we've brought forward for your consideration. Now, and like the city attorney was inquiring, I mean, other cities have not acted on this yet. We are a relatively small player in terms of our percentage share of this. There is, well, it's a small share. It's 14%. And we don't control the vote of the board. We're a minority partner, and the board can choose to move ahead with this project, and we can choose not to be a player, and we've got bigger problems, So from our standpoint, it's a feasible financing plan, and is something that we're prepared to bring forward to you upon recommendation of the SBSA board. With respect to each of the legal agreements, I can't speak to the variances between one agency and another, and whether or not this particular agreement needs additional review by special counsel or by the city attorney. We know that they've incorporated certain suggestions that we've suggested into the agreements, but we don't know whether or not those are going to be the final agreements that each and every agency considers.
Is it possible that we could, if we have a motion tonight, to add upon the condition of reviewing the other agreements, our approval?
That if the other agreements contain some language that we think should have been in our agreement, we'll bring it back. We can do that. The only other thing was, the way we read the agreement, we're effectively authorizing the authority to issue bonds in whatever amount is our share necessary. And it's not as if they have to come back to the council to say, yes, go ahead and issue those bonds. This is so that there's a cap amount. I think that's what the mayor was getting at. Well, what's the cap amount? It could be $57 million, it could be $100 million. That's right. Yeah. By contrast, SBWMA has in its joint powers agreement of the solid waste collection that the JPA can't issue bonds without coming back to each of the member entities and getting approval.
Right. And I'm sorry, but for me, if we did a not to exceed amount.
No. Right.
Sorry?
I was just going to say, in the SBWMA, it's actually a two-thirds vote of the governing bodies to get financing. It's not just simple majority.
Right. So my question is, if we did something with a not to exceed amount? Can we cap it if we want to?
Not per the current JPA, I don't believe.
Because these
Sounds like a very one-sided agreement.
These are all estimates.
I'm not an attorney, so yeah. My understanding is the JPA gives the commission the right to issue debt, and it doesn't limit that. So, your trump card is Mr. Gasilli on the board, and even then, being a minority player, he doesn't have enough weight to change the direction. The votes are weighted. It's not it's weighted on the ownership percentage. So Redwood City has 50 or 40 some odd % of the votes, and so on and so forth. So
okay. Well, thank you for that.
The one thing I would love to get this approved tonight, but at the same time, if your city attorney is not comfortable with it, I have no problem saying let's back off a couple of weeks, give him a chance to talk to the attorneys, do what we need to do, because we need to make sure that everybody's comfortable. Just to give you an idea, though, Belmont is looking at this in a little different way. They already have existing sewer revenue bonds, and they're looking at how is that, and the language in their agreement is wanting to address their current bonds where you guys don't have existing bonds. And that's kind of fine-tuning that the attorneys are doing, is to address each individual entity's certain particular needs that way.
Thank you for that.
I'd be comfortable with the council proceeding with this agreement, and if there's any substantive change that we see in the other agreements with the other entities, then we'll bring it back.
Yeah. Council? Any other questions for staff? Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Child.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, just briefly, we put this together as a projection. This doesn't mean that this is exactly what the staff will be recommending to the council approving the rates. But what we have done basically on this chart, we took the beginning fund balance. Doesn't work. The beginning fund balance that you see, $2,383,000, that's existing. And then estimated revenue this year, we will be collecting $7,970,000. And collection system, this is Councilmember Ahmad's question about the collection system. That's the cost of the operation and maintenance of the collection system. And then SPSA operation and maintenance and capital improvement program financing is $2.7 million. And the collection system capital improvement program this year is $425,000. And the transfer is, this money is being transferred out of sewer fund to general fund to pay for all the city overhead and use of the right-of-way. And staff recommends that $2 million will be set aside in a separate fund as emergency. So we take those numbers. In 2009, 2010, to answer Councilmember Royce, based on the regulations coming from Regional Water Quality Control Board, staff will be recommending, present staff equipment cannot keep up with all the requirements. The staff will be recommending 2 more maintenance workers and a piece of equipment at $250,000 be purchased next fiscal year. Assuming that recommendation will be approved by City Council, then as you can see, the rates will be raised 6%, 6%, 6%, and then the fourth year, 7%, and so on. Again, this is just projection. These numbers could change when it comes to the City Council. We're looking at late 2008 or early 2009. Different alternatives for the City Council consideration will be presented to City Council to raise the rates accordingly to be able to pay all these costs. So this is just a projection.
I probably missed that. So the maintenance workers are, why they are? Where do they work?
Right here for the city. The city staff flushes the sewer lines and cut the sewer line, make sure all the lines are clear and running, all of that.
On our pumps or our lines to get it there.
To get it there. This is all from the house, the laterals, through the main on the street, So all the trunk lines.
And why does that change versus what we're doing now? They're doing that too, right? Are we getting it there?
The regional water quality control board is requiring, for example, flushing lines a lot more often than we're doing now, and everything has to be recorded and reported. We have to clean the lines a lot more often than we do now, and everything has to be documented and recorded. So with the staff that we have, we estimate there is absolutely, this staff cannot handle all of that is going to be required by the state.
And if we can't afford 2 people, if it's not done, what happens?
The regional board, this is when the regulations come, that are here, there are fines that they can assess to the cities and agencies.
And we can't afford to pay the fine. No, I'm just.
Yeah, no, really. So basically, again, as you can see, 6% a year for first 3 years. Those could be even perhaps maybe less than 6%. However, when you go 6%, that 6% makes the balance of 7, 8, and 9 stay around that. If you reduce those 6%, then you can see the 7% and 7% on the 6th and 7th year will be higher. So we try to keep it sort of a uniform throughout the 10 years. But again, this is a projection, and it's something for City Council consideration. Will come to the City Council late 2008 or early 2009 before the notifications are sent to the property owners.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Thank you. Mr. Marktari?
Thank you.
Council discussion. Jump right in. Anybody?
Mr. Mayor, move for the approval of resolution number 2008-49. Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing execution and delivery of financing agreement with South Bay Side System Authority and approving related actions.
Second.
Subject to
Yeah, I was going to say.
return to the council in the event the other cities raise substantive issues with the financing arrangement.
So moved as amended.
Thank you.
So seconded.
And it's seconded, right. Just discussion? Any discussion? This is a bizarre agreement. And I understand, I feel Vice Mayor Grisilli saying you don't have any choice. That being said, it does seem like whether it's a joint powers agreement or, I certainly would feel more comfortable if this was a phased-in thing. But if the board already has the authority to issue bonds in debt without us doing anything anyway, as a member of the joint powers agreement, it seems like the joint powers agreement may need revising sooner rather than later. When is that up for revision?
Well, as Mr. Child said, staff is already working on revising the joint powers agreement, but regardless of how it gets reworked, we're still going to be we're still going to be a minority player in this.
I understand.
I mean, it's sort of economy. Any of these joint powers that we're in, it's an economy of scale situation. I mean, it's cheaper for us to do it this way than to have our own separate, process. I mean, you can have lines, but I mean, you wouldn't want to duplicate.
Right. I'm actually not arguing with that. I'm arguing with a slightly blind check.
But with the estimate of a 10-year, I mean, that's why Mr. Child, I think, said every year the board is going to get, if not even sooner, reports on what these estimates are coming in at. And if we find that we have 131 projects. Now, we may find, and the board may say, we're not doing 131 projects. We're going to do 100 projects. And these other 31 projects aren't getting done because we don't have the money and they're just too cost prohibitive. It's not just a blank check that we're automatically, by voting on this or any of this stuff, that we're going to go marching along and do all 131 projects. It has to have some budgetary constraints to it. But, we're just not, but yet this is the process that that's why, as you can tell, the first part of it is front-loaded with about 30 or 40%. Then we have a couple, 3 years where we're not spending very much money at all. And then in the back end for the force main is where almost half the project is.
Right now, I understood the report. It just feels like a lot of money or committee too, without a lot of design or engineering. Anyway,
I think the only thing I can tell you is that I think I will be happy, and I mean I can give monthly reports on all the stuff that we do. I have not done that. I can certainly either give written reports or I can give verbal reports on each meeting. I'd be more than willing to do that, to keep you up to date on what we're doing month by month by month.
Well, it's just a matter of, like, so let's just say in 3 years we weren't happy with the process of what was going on. Can we pull back this commitment? Sorry?
Not if by that time bonds have been issued and we've pledged our revenue stream from the sewer, our sewer service charges. And I'd also indicate that because we will be raising sewer service charges, there's a Prop 218 hearing going to be held, and we're probably going to hold it sooner than later. For example, Belmont is going to hold a Prop 218 hearing before it approves, as I understand it, the financing agreement. That's what I'm saying. We're kind of out on in the front right now. I understand they had meetings they had to go to, so it just so happens we were like the first meeting, and this was the only chance to get to it before maybe September or something like that. I just feel we are pretty far out in front. That's why I say if you're going to prove it subject to if there are any substantive changes, we won't sign it right away. We'll bring it back.
Right. I understand. It just feels, again, this is just my standpoint, is that I feel like given the lack of performance, the poor performance of the last 25 or 30 years, that it's gotten us into the situation that they should be on a tighter leash for $55 million improvement. That's just where I'm coming from on. Council, we'll leave it to, we can proceed with the vote. That's my comment.
Yeah,
Any other discussion?
I'm tending towards Redwood City, big player, 53%, just taking a little bit more time and spending a little bit more time and seeing what comes out of their meeting. In fact, I'd like to maybe attend and see what they have to say when they just discuss that and then bring it back and move quickly.
Okay. Christine?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
No.
Mayor Lewis?
No. With that, we'll move on to item number 11B, consideration of awarding a contract for street sweeping.
The mayor, members of the council, street sweeping in the city of San Carlos has been performed by the former BFI and recently by Allied Waste under a contract that was signed in 1988. And nobody raised the rates, and nobody raised the fees. And then Allied Waste last year realized they're losing money on this operation. They decided either we have to pay more or they don't want to be in this business at all anyway. So we presented a schedule to City Council. City Council approved the schedule of the sweeping, authorized the staff to prepare an RFP to hire a new contractor. That was done, and since at the same time 6 other cities were in the process of issuing RFP to see if we can reduce the cost, we brought a contractor on board, and as city manager signed a contract through June, and since this process of new RFP was still in the process, we extended that contract through August 15th. The cities of, as you see, San Mateo, Redwood City, Daly City, Atherton, Foster City, San Carlos, issued an RFP, and we received the proposal that you see in the staff report, and based on that, as you can see, contract sweeping services was the lowest bidder for San Carlos at $89,342.40 per year. Based on that, we recommend that City Council adopt a resolution awarding the contract to contract sweeping services for that amount. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Martari. Questions?
Mr. Martari, how many years? Is this just a one-year contract? Or?
This is, we'd like to award the contract for 3 years, and the provision in the contract is at the end of every year, consumer price index will be added.
Okay, so it's basically a 3-year contract with a CPI each year added on?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there a reason we have no actual contract in front of us? Just numbers?
That's why I asked that question. I don't know.
All I've got are maps of the city and this chart, but no actual contract.
The contract is our standard form of professional service agreement the city attorney has prepared, and we do it for all contracts. What we add to that is basically the maps and the schedule that you have seen, and they have to sweep it based on the schedule that was in the RFP and these locations.
Okay. Any other questions for staff?
I was curious, Mr. Mayor, that we've got a little over 100 and some odd miles of residential that we provide street sweeping for. Is this a mandated service to keep stormwater clear, or?
Yes, that's exactly part of it. And actually, the requirements from Regional Board and Water Board is coming down in the next couple of years. Probably the requirement will be higher than this, but based on what I've seen, this schedule meets the future requirements as well. This schedule collects over 20 tons a month out of the gutter, and that all has been documented. We have to provide the documents to Regional Board every quarter. They have to see how much we collect. So the average San Carlos has been over 20 tons a month.
So again,
But it is part of the NPDES requirement.
all right, so it is mandated, we have to do street sweeping, and this is, to some extent, as small an area as I can get away with?
Yes, let's put it that way. As I said, the future, 2-3 years from now, the requirements of removal trash and everything will be a lot more expensive. But this right now meets their requirement for next couple of years, at least we know.
Any other questions for staff?
I feel in a quandary because, as Mr. Mukhtari knows, I am not in agreement with what was done by the council back in, what year was that again? It's in the staff report. When this was changed from, basically what happened was the $60,000 to pay for street sweeping was taken out of the general fund and tacked on to people's garbage rates. And the problem I have with it is I'm just not convinced that that is appropriate per Prop 218, because that means everybody in the city, every resident in the city is paying for street sweeping even though they don't receive the service. Because, for instance, you go up on Coronado or places like that, they don't have gutters. There's no way to sweep the streets in certain hillside neighborhoods. Also, the fact that street sweeping includes our public plazas, it includes sweeping along, say, Britton Avenue along Burton Park, which is a city-owned parcel. So the residents, through their garbage rates, are paying for street sweeping, which is should be paid for out of the general fund. And I've read some material. It's been a while since I reviewed it, but I remember reading material about Prop 218 and what you can and can't do. And I'm not in agreement that we can do this. So I'm not in agreement that, I feel uncomfortable approving a contract, even though the contract is not about where does the money come from. The contract is simply about where the money goes to, who does the work, and so forth. But it just makes me feel uncomfortable. So,
Mr.
letting the
Mukhtari,
council know, I'm not asking for discussion on this necessarily tonight, but I'm just letting the council know I'm going to vote no on the contract simply because I'm not convinced about the process and what was gone through.
No, apparently, again, and Mr. Grocott has been here longer than we have, and we weren't around when all that was discussed. So are you saying is this $89,000 going to go on people's garbage bills?
Well, right now, Allied Waste collects...
I know right now Allied Waste does it, but I'm talking about...
$60,000. And in this fiscal year, there is adequate reserve to pay for this. But next year, for a lot of other reasons, the garbage rates have to be increased.
Right.
And this will be included in that.
So again, the garbage rates will reflect, that's where the money will come from to pay for this?
Correct.
Okay, I'm just asking, because I wasn't, to me it's separate. The garbage company isn't doing it anymore. So that's going to work out with SW, somehow there's some magic contract language with whoever's going to get the contract?
Several of the cities in SBWMA do it this way, yes.
Okay, so whoever gets the contract has to build in...
That's correct.
This, but then they collect it and give it to this company?
They give it to the city, and the city gives it to that company. That's correct.
Okay, and why wouldn't the city just collect it?
Why wouldn't the city...
Why is there a middleman? Why is it just, it's easier to do it that way?
Yes, when you have as many households as
I'm
we
just
have.
asking
and
a
we have to mail
question.
out- The only city in the SBWMA that collects its own fees, as I understand, is Redwood City. Everybody else has their fees for solid waste and recycling collected through...
Understand, but I'm talking about street sweeping. Every other city does it too.
Street sweeping, again, as Parviz indicated, when rates are when we come to you next year to increase rates, there'll be a Prop 218 notice. It'll include everything that's going to be included in the fees, and it'll include street sweeping.
But all the other cities are going to have this in there also.
I wouldn't say necessarily
You want
all of
streets-
them are. The ones that currently do that will.
Okay, the ones that currently do are going to continue the same way. I'm just asking the process in other cities, because I'm just asking how it's done. Okay, thank you.
But there will be Prop 18 notice, 218, next year.
Okay.
Yes.
When we incur this.
This one. Okay.
One small point. First of all, after reading your report, I found out that streets get swept. I don't have sidewalks, so I just sweep in front of my own house. But that's fine. I'm willing to pay for it for the downtown that's clean and parking lots. And just one real minor point is maybe checking with our park and rec, director. I know I've been in a lot of involved with the summer concert series, and I know we have sports up at Heather where the kids have snacks and so forth. Whether or not there's any consideration of more frequent cleaning on streets that surround our parks. And again, I'm not requiring, I know it's not part of the bidding and so forth, but just tuck it away and just kind of get some assessment on the frequency to keep our neighbors, because they do share the park. And
In contract, we have a provision for extra work. So the contractor will provide extra work with a 24-hour notice at a certain rate.
Good.
Yes, that's in
Okay.
the contract.
Super. Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number 2008-50, resolution of the City Council, City of San Carlos, authorizing award of contract for street sweeping to the appropriate agency listed in the report.
Second. Any other discussion? Christine?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Lewis?
Yes. All right, we move on to item number 11C, consideration of economic development plan update for fiscal year 2008 and 2009.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. I'm Mark Sawicki, Economic Development and Housing Manager. Here to present for your consideration an annual update to the city's economic development plan and to answer any of your questions. Our economic consultants, Rosenau Spevacek Group, provided assistance in the preparation of the original ED plan, as well as this update, and are involved in most aspects of its implementation. Frank Spevacek and Alexis Smittle of RSG are here tonight and can also answer any questions you might have regarding strategies or implementation. The city created an economic development plan in 2007 based on input from the community, city staff, EDAC, and the city council. The plan was adopted a year ago. The document was designed as a 3-year business plan to improve the climate for economic activity, encourage development opportunities, and ultimately to grow our tax base. Since economic development is an evolving endeavor, the city is conducting this update to review and revise the plan to ensure it reflects and responds to current market conditions, as well as the community's collective vision of how to enhance economic growth. This update allows us to take stock of what we've achieved, revise and add to the plan as we move forward into the next fiscal year. An earlier draft of this ED plan update was reviewed by EDAC at their July 2nd meeting. EDAC's comments and modifications are incorporated in the plan update document that was provided in your packet. The 2007 adopted plan contained 21 objectives or tasks organized into geographic and operational focus areas. Among all the objectives, the EDAC and Council set these 5 as the priorities. Since July of 2007, when the plan was adopted, we have taken action and continue to pursue all of these priorities. In particular, in the 2007-08 period, we began by forming a successful ED partnership work group with members of city staff, EDAC, Chamber of Commerce, and HIA that meets monthly. I was hired in August of 2007 to manage implementation. In December, we raised an additional $7 million of RDA funding for implementation. In January, we produced the East Side Economic Development Opportunities book and showing opportunities and constraints for adding hotel and retail space on the East Side. We kicked off the general plan update process, which continues the conversation of where and how we can promote economic growth in the city. And we've also taken a closer look at the potential to develop city-owned properties at Wheeler Plaza, South Plaza, as well as at Holly and Industrial. While working through the 2000 plan, staff, EDAC, and the Economic Development Partnership have identified some improvements and some new initiatives for the plan. In particular, EDAC has discussed and plans to continue a discussion of how best to measure economic development, set goals, and evaluate progress in a way that can further inform the ED strategy and increase city revenue. The ED partnership has already done some significant work on discussing and drafting a marketing strategy that in the next few months will be shaped further by EDAC and our consultants, and we hope to bring to you. The partnership and EDAC have also recognized the importance of communicating the role of economic development to the citizens and businesses and having a strategy to obtain feedback on our efforts. So those are some of the things that are going to be added in the Economic Development Plan update. Many of the priority projects and activities for 2008 and 2009 are basically a continuation of projects that we've already got underway and are building momentum on. In the next year, we will be considering opportunities to strategically deploy resources and commit funding, particularly redevelopment agency funding, to facilitate catalyst projects and public improvements such as the Landmark Hotel site, Wheeler Plaza, El Camino corridor improvements, and others as you see here. And these will also appear in the RDA implementation plan, which is the next item on the agenda. With regards to developing benchmarks, this is a new initiative in the Economic Development Plan in the update. The plan uses available data to track and project changes in the next 5 years to what we've defined as ED revenues, that being hotel tax, the transient-oriented tax, sales tax, and the property tax. During the next year, EDAC staff and consultants will consider and begin tracking other potential measurements to present a more refined picture of growth and progress. Here's a projection of the city's general fund revenue and expenditure forecast for the next 5 years. Economic development is expected to grow the tax base, and that growth is reflected in the increased contribution from sales tax, property tax, and TOT. These revenues total $14 million in 07 and 08 and are forecast here to grow to $17.4 million. Unfortunately, this growth does not reduce the structural deficit, as we were discussing before, as expenditures are projected to continue to grow faster. It's difficult to actually project significantly higher growth than what we've shown here. The assumptions in this forecast are actually more optimistic than what you've seen in your budget documents. I know this point came up earlier. What we've tried to do in the Economic Development Plan is respond to both EDAC and Council has grappled with how does economic development bridge this gap? How much can we do? What can we do? And in what time frame? So we've been trying to play with some of our assumptions to be a little more optimistic if we can achieve them. That's our target. That's our goal. That's what we're trying to work on the economic development side. In this particular circumstance, we have property tax growing at 5%, sales tax growing at 2.75%, and TOT grows at 4%, plus assumes that we get additional money from adding a hotel by 2013. We've set 3 benchmark goals in the Economic Development Plan update. One is related to taxable sales. We want to achieve growth in taxable sales on an average annual basis that exceeds the growth in the county. As you might be able to see here, broader economic conditions are going to have the greatest influence on the rise and fall of taxable sales. There's not a lot that we can do about the greater economy. And in the last several years, we've actually seen sales growth on the San Carlos line has been increasing. But if you look back to 2001 through 2003, we actually had declines. Compared to the county average, the bottom line, in many of those years, we've done worse than the county. In only 2 of those years, we've done better than the county. So rather than set an absolute goal based on a fixed percentage growth or a dollar amount of growth, what we thought we would do is measure ourselves against the county average. So our goal is actually to try to exceed the county average by 1%. Our growth would exceed the county's average by 1%. So the county may drop 1% or 2% in the next year. If it drops 1%, then we should be flat. If it drops 2%, we should be down 1%. That would be our goal. The second goal that we've added is to achieve growth in assessed property value that on an average annual basis would exceed the growth in the county by 1%. Similar to sales tax, the real estate market is going to determine the direction of property values. We've been fortunate in this decade to see some healthy growth in property values, but by all accounts, we can't really expect this with the downturn in the housing market. But regardless of the market impact on property values, new development and redevelopment of properties can help grow our assessed value base, particularly in comparison to the county average. Again, you'll see that in the past we have not exceeded the county average. In most cases, we've been below the county average, and on average have been 0.23% below the county average. So our goal, again, to exceed that by 1%. The next goal is related to the hotel tax, the TOT. And our goal here is to build a hotel, add rooms. We've made a conservative estimate of adding 150 rooms that would be occupied 50% of the time at $150 a night. That would give us another $400,000 and allow us to get back to the peak where we were in 2001. Of course, 2001 was fewer rooms, but much greater occupancy and room rates. If we get that, that would be an added bonus. So this concludes the presentation. I look forward to answering any of your questions. And staff's recommendation is to adopt the economic development plan as presented, or with any minor modifications that you may provide.
Thank you very much. Questions on the economic development plan from council? Who'd like to go first?
Mr. Mayor, I just found one interesting note on page 22 of the Economic Development Plan update. There's a completed consider joining the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, and it's noted that council approved that. We did not. So just one small fact error there. We did not approve that. Past that, I guess I overall like what's going on. I guess there was a question related to the TOT that we've started to see travel go down. We've started to see airline seat miles go down. We haven't explicitly said high fuel costs and high energy costs, but I've got to imagine that's going to affect our TOT.
It's been healthy to date, most recently to date, and there's a lot of other cities looking to add hotels. So, yeah, the market could come down, and with added rooms, it could make it tougher. But
And Softail does well, doesn't it?
Sorry?
The Softail's a thriving local.
As far as I know, yeah.
Yep, and they get much more than $150 a night, I believe. And we did sign a San Carlos climate protection letter. That was
right. So it was not the mayor's letter.
Correct. I just wanted to, but we should know that we did sign. Other comments? Questions? No? Councilmember Burkott, do you have any? No? Vice Mayor Grisilli? No. Did I have any? I was wondering, have there been any hotels that have shown interest? Any names or types that we should know about?
Yes, we've had discussions with a couple of hotel operators and developers, very preliminary, and we will be returning at the end of August with a report to council about the feasibility of the Landmark Hotel site.
Okay. The one thing is periodically, I know I'm asked a lot in public, like, well, what is going on with like who might be interested in coming to town and so forth. So the degree to which that we can maybe get some reports of activity or whatever, obviously you don't want to compromise negotiations and things that are going on in the city, but the degree to which that we can get just sort of updates on, here's some potential interested parties in San Carlos and so forth. I know it would help me personally to be able to sort of converse about that from time to time. Nice report, really detailed, really informative, really nicely done. Great. Motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the Economic Development Plan update for fiscal year 2008-9.
Your second?
Second.
Christine?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Lewis?
Yes. And now we are a redevelopment agency with 5 directors. please. Item number 12A.
Good evening, Honorable Chairman and Agency Board. I'm presenting the midterm review of the 5-year implementation plan and the 10-year housing compliance plan tonight as a study session item so that staff can obtain your feedback. And before placing this item on the agenda for adoption, adoption requires a public hearing scheduled with a 30-day notice. So before doing that, we wanted to ensure that the document reflects all your input. The current document in your packet reflects the input of EDAC, which reviewed and improved upon earlier drafts at their June and July meetings. Basic principle of redevelopment laws for the agency to operate in a transparent manner. Therefore, all projects undertaken must be in the implementation plan. During the 5-year plan period, the agency must review and update the plan to show progress and address any changes that have occurred. San Carlos actually adopted its current 5-year plan late in the planning period. The planning period is actually 2004 to 2009. We adopted in 2006. So this midterm review is actually coming late as a result, and it's actually 1 year before we will be adopting the next 5-year plan for the start of the fiscal year 2009-10. It's not a coincidence we're presenting both of these tonight, the ED plan update and the midterm review. These plans have many commonalities, and it makes sense to review them together to ensure consistency. The major projects and activities are largely the same since the RDA provides much of the funding for economic development in San Carlos. However, although there is overlap, these plans serve a different purpose. The agency exists to eliminate physical and economic blight, but projects and activities in the project area, which is mostly the commercial sector, are expected to increase economic activity and expand the tax base of the city. Here is the project area shaded in blue. For activities to be included in the agency's implementation plan, there needs to be a nexus to improving blighting conditions in that area. The existing implementation plan includes an assortment of projects which have been loosely organized into planning activities, public improvements, site development, and housing. As you may recall, 20% of redevelopment fund balances are segregated into a housing fund to improve, increase, and preserve housing for households of low and moderate income. As discussed, most of these projects appear in the ED plan as well, though it is important to note, again, these projects do address blighting conditions cited in the original redevelopment plan that was adopted in 1986. The issuance of an additional $7 million in bond financing allows a significant number of projects to be added to the plan since it was originally adopted, the original implementation plan. As of the beginning of this fiscal year, the agency has fund balances of $5.1 million in the restricted low-mod housing fund and $10.1 million of unrestricted funds that could be used for either housing or non-housing projects. Please note that the inclusion of these projects in the plan does not indicate final approval. Agency projects and program costs remain subject to consideration of the council and agency board as part of the budget process. Wondering what this slide was going to look like on the big screen. This is an updated forecast of the agency non-housing revenues and expenditures for the plan period that ends with the current fiscal year. So actually, we're looking at the, at this point, our update is the 0809 column. Projects have been added, and they're indicated by the footnote 2. You might be able to better read that in your packet. And allocations have also been revised and updated. Some of the significant project allocations that go beyond this 5-year period include the Holly 101 interchange, which has another $2.6 million that is out beyond this 5-year period. Britton Avenue widening is another $600,000, and connectivity for the transit village is budgeted another $400,000. That's beyond these numbers. This is the Housing Fund 5-year plan budget. Again, we're in our final year. Projects that have been added, again indicated by a footnote 2 on the chart, include a potential update of the BMR ordinance and an unidentified housing project. We've also increased the allocation for the first-time homebuyer program in anticipation that households purchasing BMR units at 1000 El Camino will make use of this program. So we've increased that budget. Under redevelopment law, housing fund balances are not allowed to accumulate in an amount that exceeds the prior 4 years of 20% set aside, and we are getting close and possibly surpassing that limit, which is why we need to identify a project within the next year and encumber funds to do low mod housing. In conclusion, staff recommends that we incorporate any feedback you might have tonight into a revised document and set a date for a public hearing with 30 days' notice where we can bring it back and adopt it.
Great, thank you. Questions, Council?
I have a couple. Since this is a 5-year plan, I was noticing on page 7, I believe it is, of the RSG document, drainage master plan seems to be taken out altogether. Or is this, so this is a 5-year plan, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I understand why. I didn't necessarily agree with it, but I understood why the Public Works Director at the time was saying, well, we need to wait for this regional water quality control board rules and regulations. But do we not expect something from that within 5 years? And so therefore, shouldn't we plan on spending some money on drainage master plan within 5 years?
Again, we're in the last year of the 5-year plan, so the expectation is that's not going to happen in the next year.
I see. Okay.
But we will be back again in the spring for another 5-year plan, in which case that may be included.
I gotcha.
We do
Okay.
5-year plans every year. We figure we'll get it covered at some point, yeah.
I hope so. So maybe that does away with my next question, but I'll ask it anyways. One of the intersections that's in the area is at Holly and Old County. And I think you were at the meeting where the homeowners association are now called the East Side Greater something or other. I liked it when it was Loyola, Scott. Much simpler. Anyways, they identified that intersection, that corner, as, you know, if there's anything in the city that's blighted, that area seems to be somewhat blighted. It has its problems as they identified it. So are we doing anything? Maybe not in the next year, I guess, huh?
It's been included in page 9, increase and improve transit village connections. We've sort of expanded that to include not just in front of the train station, but other key intersections around the transit village, Holly and El Camino and San Carlos Avenue, Holly and Old County Road, and East San Carlos and Old County Road.
So some of the things, for example, that were identified by the group had to do with, for instance, you know, power poles that were put right in the center of the sidewalk, so the accessibility issue becomes, you know, a big one, and also the idea that you've got power poles. The other thing that happens is you've got birds on the line, and we all know what birds on the line do, so when you're walking down the sidewalk, you become a target. So they were identifying that. Is there anything that could be...
That's been included also on page 9. You'll see Old County Road Improvements, new project.
Okay, so it's being thought of.
Yes.
Okay, very good.
The only challenge with Old County Road is the project area, going back to that map, does not go that far up. I don't know if I can...
Yeah, I've got the map right here. Oh, it appears that it does, but is it just on the one side?
Yeah. So that's a challenge. You'd have to make a finding that it's going to help the project area, which is something that
Could be done.
we could probably do, but I couldn't say that right now.
Excuse me?
We could probably do it, but I couldn't say right now. It would have to
Okay.
be, we would need council to help us.
Okay, well, you got one council member who's willing to help you.
I mean, redevelopment council.
Yeah, redevelopment agency members, right. It is a problem. Yeah, I think that the homeowners association rightfully identified it as an issue. And I don't know, maybe it's moving the power lines to the other side of the street or something, but it is a problem.
Yeah, and the project that's identified is actually to look into what we can do, how much it would cost, and whether the agency can actually do that.
By the way, just follow-up question then. Could part of the proposal be, since the agency boundaries are the other side of the street, that we talk to the train about moving the power lines to that side of the street or something like that?
Definitely something we could look into.
Fair enough. Thank you.
And I guess to that point, to extend the redevelopment reach, the blighted area reach, what is that process? That's why I asked those with more experience. It's just sort of like,
You got a minute?
You would have to do a major amendment of the redevelopment plan,
county
which
might
would
object,
require a public hearing, and
School district might object, and the county
school
might
district and the
object.
county who.
Other agents.
Right. The
Affects the
main
tax
benefit of the redevelopment project area is that we get to keep the property taxes that the county and the school district would otherwise get, so they would.
I do understand that part, yeah.
They would be very interested in our attempt to expand that.
Okay. Just wondering about the cool reception, too. It's part of that idea. All right, other questions? Please.
Yeah, just one, and this actually, Councilmember Grocott may be able to help on this. I noticed both in reading the industrial road improvements and Old County Road. First of all, Old County Road, I think that's great. I think it's neglected. There's a lot of improvements and things, and as a transit village goes in, and that whole corridor and sidewalk just really needs to be cleaned up. But I noticed that Old County didn't have anything about bike lanes, and I believe when I went to I went to one of your BPAC meetings, it had talked about Old County Road being the master bike lane through San Mateo County, the connectivity from city to city. And when I read industrial, I see bike lanes. And when I think about industrial growth and PAMP and marketplace, and I even voiced some input to Mr. Seve about a month or two ago, as we continue to develop, especially the southern part of industrial. That's where trucks are. We don't have a lot of space. We're getting a lot more retail down there. We need to make sure that industrial accommodates our traffic flows. And I know this has nothing to do with traffic flows, but when I see bike lanes, which were part of the improvements that were made a few years ago on industrial, I want to make sure we just rethink, is it both, or, does it become more Old County? Or is industrial a place to have a bike lane all the way along the way? So, first maybe from you, Mark, and then I'd like to ask Matt his thoughts.
Is the question whether bike lanes are included in Old County Road?
Well, I see in our plan here that bike lanes are included in the industrial road, but I don't see in Old County. And I just question that, whether or not they should be up closer to the train tracks. Where our master
under
plan
increase
is.
and improve transit village connections, it does mention bike lanes and mentions a number of the routes, including Old County Road.
But is that just near the transit village, or is it all of Old County? Because Old County doesn't mention it.
Right. Again, it goes back to the similar question of how much of Old County is in the project area.
Okay. But my other part of the question is my concern of bicycles on industrial with what I see as the future traffic flow between big semi-trucks and SUVs, overall safety.
Right, so that may be an issue that we bring up beyond the scope of the redevelopment agency, given the fact that where the area ends. There's also connectivity to Redwood City, which is probably industrial's a better connection to Redwood City. Old County's a better, perhaps, connection. They both work to Belmont. Anyway, probably a discussion beyond the scope of this, given the identified redevelopment area. We have to extend the meeting.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to extend the meeting for 10 minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I do have one point. Looking at page 15, the first-time home buyer mortgage assistance. According to this, we've never made a grant, which is kind of
in the last several years.
which is kind of disappointing. And I know that there had been an intent from the council to see if we could make these funds available to targeted city employees. So I would like to see that explored further. I realize that there's a criteria. I mean, there was a point here. It says no qualified applications have been received. I'd like to see if we can change that language such that targeted city employees may be qualified.
You might be able to add teachers to that as well. I mean, one of my questions is have other redevelopment agencies entertained broader definition for, say, like, I don't know, police, fire, teacher, there may be others, but to to get special treatment within those first-time homebuyer programs?
I'm not sure there's any need to give them special treatment. The only criteria is that it has to be 120% of median income or less, and if they qualify, then they can get the loan. I think what is more important is making sure they know that the program is available.
Yeah.
But it's not like we need to make a preference because
we don't have a popularity problem right now.
Yes, exactly.
So perhaps for the future.
A couple of other things. Their redevelopment council has. We're reviewing the program for two reasons. One, we have a contract with the county that administers the program. We're renewing that. And there may be additional restrictions by the fact that we are using redevelopment funds. We may need to designate those units as being redevelopment fund related units, which may impact the ability of owners to resell them later. So that's something that I'm exploring. Another piece of information, Hart has also just started a first-time home buyers program, similar but different program features. So that's also available to people in the city as well. So.
Okay. Other questions? Vice Mayor Grisilli? One other question I have. It seems like the developers have a disposition to want to do more renting, affordable renting, than affordable equity purchasing or ownership. Is there any way to put provisions in this plan to try to target higher ownership affordable housing being offered than just renting?
Yes, it's of lesser economic consequence for someone to do affordable rental than it is affordable condos. The gap is so much greater. That's one of the things that we could consider doing in order to encumber our housing funds, is to assist when it's a condo development, because it is that much more expensive. That's one of the reasons why we would like to bring the BMR ordinance back, because right now it doesn't make a distinction between for sale and for rent. It's the same requirement for both, and that's something we might want you to take a look at.
I personally would like to see you take a look at that. I think anybody knows that to get into the housing game, you have to get into the equity part of the market. Renting's good and important, don't get me wrong, but it's also important to get people a long-term foot in the housing market, to really give people that shot. So I'd like to see us sort of take a look at that and differentiate it and make sure that it's still economically feasible for development, but I'd like to see us put some criteria out there. It seems to just kind of go by the wayside. We're hoping it gets taken up by the development community, but it's not in their economic interest to necessarily just do that. All right. If there's no other questions for staff or discussion, motion?
Mr. Weiss, we need to schedule a date specific. Mr. Weiss? Hello, Mr. Weiss?
Talking with council?
I know, talking with council, figuring out the date that we're going to make this schedule a public hearing for.
Well, I'm a little hesitant to schedule. The difficulty is that knowing what our schedule is like for the next 3 months, we are heavily booked in August, which isn't within 30 days anyhow. September, we've got one meeting scheduled where we will not have a full complement of the council. That might be possible. September 9th, I think, is currently the potential date. And I know that in October we have an appeal pending, as well as a development proposal that is going to take up a good share of our time on the agenda. So I'd like to have some flexibility, I guess, short of maybe suggesting that September 9th might be a possibility, but we'd only have 3 council members here.
So if we can make a motion with flexibility for the date, is that right?
Yes.
That's all.
And we'll put it on a regular council meeting night. So
okay, I'll make a motion that we schedule a public hearing to be decided.
Second.
For this item.
Christine?
All those in favor?
Director?
All those in favor, or can we have to do director? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There we go. We've done it. And with that, I believe we're through our last item, and we can adjourn the meeting. Well, excuse me, yes? Were you going to say something? You're leaning forward, expectantly eyebrows up?
No, I was just getting attention.
Okay, we're adjourning the meeting. Let me help you.